This is my father's story, and happened when he was an 18-year-old gas station attendant in the late 70s. And without the help of a certain long-haul trucker, I probably wouldn't be here. The gas station was 24 hours, and my dad was the only one working the night shift from 11 to 7, when a guy comes in who just gives him the creeps. He seemed sketchy, and was wearing a tight jacket and pants, and you could tell he had something in his pants under the jacket. Mind you, this was during the summer, and it was warm, so why was he wearing a jacket to begin with? It was later confirmed he was on drugs. A lot of the truck drivers use this station, as it's the only 24-hour gas station in a long stretch of the highway. They also had a big lot where truckers could park and sleep or just take a break. Well, on this night, it was just my dad and the sketchy dude, and one trucker in there who he kind of knew, as he came in frequently enough to be conversational. And he asked him slyly if he wouldn't mind if the trucker stayed to hang out until the sketchy dude left. Well, after looking at the stocked shelves for several minutes while sneaking peeks at my dad, the guy eventually looked fed up and got into his blue car and sped off. The cool truck driver guy hung out with my dad a little longer until another couple of guys came in to use the booth they had to eat a sandwich. I should also point out that it was pretty middle of nowhere in rural southeast United States and the 1970s. CBs and landline it was, and my dad had only a landline in the store, and not a protective weapon at all. So the hours pass, and my dad had shaken off the paranoia when all of a sudden this guy in a car comes hauling ass into the lot, jumps out, and sprints into the store hollering he needs a phone. He didn't have a CB, nor did he see a phone at the other station. He also wasn't familiar with the area, and my dad's station was the first place he found. He calls 911 to report that he had walked in on a gas station 14 miles back, which happened to be the next closest gas station, to find the attendant shot and dead. No one else was around, and the only other piece of information is that a blue car was speeding out of the lot when the trucker pulled in. Apparently they eventually apprehended the guy in the blue car, and my dad confirmed that it was the sketchy dude from earlier in the night, and they charged him with murder and armed robbery. The long-haul trucker who waited around with my dad that night, thanks, and I hope you're keeping it real. Also worth adding that apparently the sketchy guy in the blue car was already a bad apple who was either being looked for or on probation. He was in the system, and my dad and myself are lucky to be alive. I once dated a girl who was a trucker. She mostly did short haul, but occasionally had to run loads to a warehouse out of state, and when she did I usually tagged along. There was this one time that we were on the road, and we pulled into this nasty abandoned looking truck stop right on the New Mexico-Texas border for fuel. All fueled up, we headed inside to see if we could get something to eat. The inside of this place looked like something out of Fallout. Mostly empty shelves with random dust-covered canned goods and old boxes of this and that. Lights flickering and making that pinging sound, with not a soul to be found. We grabbed a few bags of chips and waited near the register, and after making some noise and waiting for like 5 minutes, we put the stuff back and went outside. Surrounding her truck were about 10 guys who all looked pretty scary. Remembering at that precise moment I had left the gun in the truck, my stomach understandably dropped. A biker then rolled up and talked to the 2 guys near the back of the truck for a minute, then does the slitting throat motion. My girl is shaking and close to crying, and I'm pretty sure I've already crapped my pants. The biker throws his hands up, tells everyone to move and walks over to us. He then very politely tells us that someone had stolen a trailer of his up north, and he was looking for it. This one wasn't it, and he apologized for the drama, reached into his pocket and grabbed something and sticks it in my hand, and tells me he was very sorry for the trouble. As he's walking away, I look into my hand. It's a bag of weed. We got the hell out of there pretty fast. Good weed though, and we joked about trying to find him on the way back to get a bit more. These are some of my grandpa's stories while he was a state trooper, and recounted a story where a group of college students were embarking on their journey for spring break, when, during their course of the drive, they suffered a collision with a semi-truck. Amidst the chaos, 3 of them emerged from the wreck seemingly unscathed. My grandfather arrived and began surveying the scene. The car's roof had been peeled back like a tin can, and the brunt of the devastation was concentrated on the passenger side. The 3 college students were eerily quiet, not answering questions very helpfully, and clearly in a state of shock. So my grandfather approached the vehicle to inspect it further, his concern unwavering as he sought to offer assistance to the unseen 4th passenger who hadn't actually left the vehicle yet. From his vantage point behind and to the left, the individual appeared unscathed, but as he rounded to the front, he discovered to his horror that the right side of the passenger's head had been obliterated by the force of the collision. In a separate story, I found myself inadvertently delving into the dark recesses of my grandfather's past while looking through old police files and photographs stored away in his filing cabinets. Among the relics of his law enforcement career lay a haunting image. My curiosity piqued, and so I asked my grandfather about the macabre photo, prompting him to share a tragic story. There was this very tired truck driver who had been doing too many hours, and he succumbed to exhaustion. In so, he somehow passed out, managed to open his door while doing so, and not wearing a seatbelt. I'm sure you can add together what happened. Consequently, he plummeted to the ice-cold asphalt, where he was promptly flattened by his truck wheels, leaving his corpse crushed and lifeless like crisps under bison. The task of recovering his shattered shell from the icy embrace of the winter ground fell upon my grandfather and his colleagues, a grim duty requiring them to scrape off the remnants of a life come short from the frigid pavement. As you can imagine, it was not his favorite job. Many moons ago, when I was a college student, my friend had borrowed my camper van off his friend or relative. It was really sweet because it was big and could sleep 4 to 5 people. So we had this great camper van out of nowhere, but had nowhere to go. Me and my friend reached out to another friend of ours, and we as a group decided to pick some place and head on a road trip. Everyone was excited, and as soon as we got to talking, everyone was full of ideas for destinations, some more realistic than others. We trusted in our friend, who seemed to have a really good place in mind, and with that, our plans for our summer vacation were set in stone. The road trip was on. Well, our plan was to drive in the general direction of the place that our friend recommended. It was really fun since we didn't have to rely on hotels or anything like that. We could eat and drink in the van and be in peace. It was a cheap way to travel through Japan. We could go from place to place whenever we felt like it. To us young university students, it was a real sense of freedom that we hadn't experienced before. We were going further into the mountains through the windy mountain passes, taking in the scenery, the luscious green forests and stuff. Because we had a drink the night before, the second or third night into our mini expedition we set off late. We didn't decide where to stop for the night. The following took place around 10 p.m. We wanted to go and detox in the hot springs, and we heard of one out in the middle of nowhere. It would be the perfect way to end our little trip. The roads were getting more and more twisty and winding. It felt like every couple of minutes my pal was taking a hairpin corner. The streetlights were few and far between into the mountains, and my friend was driving, and my only other friend was laying down somewhere in the back. We were chugging along the dark road when suddenly the car's headlights illuminate two figures in the middle of it. They were walking into traffic, a parent and child. Why the hell were they way out here in the middle of the night? I'll never forget them, and you'll understand why soon enough. There was a middle-aged woman holding a young boy's hand. The woman was wearing a cardigan, and the small boy looked to be about 2 to 3 years old. We had to swerve around them. Thankfully, we weren't going very fast, but fast enough for it to be kind of a close call. To be honest with you, red flags at this point, you know what I mean? What the hell was going on here? Whatever, it doesn't seem good, I thought to myself. Pretty sure my friend who was driving felt exactly the same thing I did. He spoke up and said something to me. Weird time of night to be taking your kid for a walk. Huh? Yes, true. Maybe they lived nearby though. But neither of us had seen any houses nor streetlights for ages. We didn't see much of anything out there, to be honest. The sat-nav didn't work either, but it worked a little in patches. I'd been watching it every now and then, and noticed the landmark stuff like restaurants and grocery markers weren't there. It was literally just a mountain, and we were going to be on it until we got off it. There was no good reason for these people to be heading in this direction, in my opinion, and the sat-nav's opinion. It was weird. We carried on going, and eventually reached the hot spring place, which had an RV park. It wasn't busy. There were a few cars and vans there, but that wasn't what struck us as odd. People were clamoring. They were up in arms in the parking lot. Even though it was late, there were loads of people walking around the premises shining flashlights. Everyone seemed to be frantically looking for something. As we pulled the camper van to a stop, two women came running towards us. They said a child had gone missing. A 2-year-old boy had disappeared. Apparently his parents took their eye off him for a split second, and in that short window he had vanished. My friend and I turned to each other, and something simultaneously clicked in our heads. The middle-aged woman and the child we had seen walking in traffic. We got to the traumatized parents to look over the footage of the dash cam. The mother of the missing child was distraught when she confirmed that the little boy was her son. She begged us to take her there. We agreed, of course, and they jumped in the van, woke up the friend who was asleep in the back and had no idea what the hell was going on, and headed back the way we came. Some of the others from the parking lot followed on behind in their cars. Our friend in the back was asking loads of questions, but there was no time to answer him. We were all flustered. We drove down the winding roads, and things were not looking good. There was no sign of the boy or the abductor. When all hope appeared to be lost, my headlights fell on a small figure crouching by the guardrail at the side of the road. It was the missing boy. We hit the brakes and the boy's parents ran to him. He was visibly distressed. He wailed and wailed. His parents asked him what happened, and he said that he was brought to this spot and told to wait by the woman who took him from the hot spring spa. She went off through a gap in the bush and presumably would be back soon. It was so stressful. Both parents and child were crying of relief and fear. I've never seen anything like it before. Soon the police arrived and we went back to the spa. The police requested the dashcam footage and we happily provided it. They were treating the case as if it were an attempted kidnap, which it was. We needed to get the dashcam memory stick thing back, so the police took our details and the local cops kept us up to date with the case when they called us to say that we could have the memory stick back. The woman who took the boy wasn't caught. They had nothing to go on, no evidence, no motive, and no idea where she was going to take the child or where she'd come from. I've wondered myself what the motive was. Perhaps she just meant to lead the boy off and abandon him. Maybe she was just never going to come back as she intended to leave the kid by the side of the road. Such abandonment is kind of an ancient custom in some of the rural mountainous areas of Japan. Maybe she was doing that for some unknown reason. I have no idea. Maybe she was going to come back for him, or take him to some other place. But regardless of the explanation, the whole thing was certainly malicious. I'm just glad that we were suspicious about the situation when we saw the woman and child, and lucky enough to encounter them before reaching the hot springs where he'd been taken. The image on the dashcam of the woman leading the boy away is one that will live with me forever. She was smiling a really big smile. So disturbing. I don't think I'll ever forget it. I live in an apartment that was built in 1989. Let me just go over the layout because it's important. It's a pretty standard place, but it has a loft. And it's a bit cramped. I don't really like it. I find it kind of creepy. There's a certain sense of vulnerability that comes with having a loft, which I can't quite explain, but by the end of the story, you'll understand why it frightens me. It all started with a feeling one night after work. I hadn't been able to shift this feeling, and as soon as I came through the door, the first thing I see as I enter the apartment is my loft, and I get the feeling that something was watching me from up there. At first, I just thought it was my tired mind conjuring up something. You know, this has happened before when you get tired, but this time, it felt different. Little did I know a grudge was born that day. When you're in the bed in the loft, you naturally look out and down and see the entryway leading to the kitchen. So naturally, when I sleep on my side, and therefore I face the entryway to the kitchen. Sometimes before sleep comes for me, I get the strong feeling that someone is looking at me, staring at me from down there in the entryway. In uneasy times like that, I try to read or get myself to sleep as soon as possible. I hit the lights so I don't get distracted, and just use a little nightlight near my pillow to read my book. However, one night, a deep sense of unease crept over me. I felt as if something was wrong. I heard a noise coming from down below. The lights were off down there. I listened carefully, and it sounded as if someone was exhaling. It definitely sounded like breathing. The second my mind understood that I was hearing breathing, I stayed deathly still. I was completely terrified. My heart began thundering in my chest as I thought there was an intruder in the house. The air in the room felt heavy and oppressive, and it enveloped me. It was all around me. The room seemed to grow darker and I felt strange. I could still hear the noise. It resounded around the room below, and it sounded closer. Beneath the loft, you see, there was a blind spot, but I felt as though I'd pinpointed the spot where the breathing sound was coming from. Someone was certainly down there, with their back against the wall. I managed to convince myself of that. When I imagined that, I shuddered, drew my shoulders up to my chin and held my covers tight. It was like a stalemate. I couldn't do anything, and the feeling that there was someone down there wouldn't go away. After a moment or two, the breathing suddenly stopped. I thought it was all over, and that I had imagined the whole thing, and relief washed over me. But then in that moment, I heard a familiar sound that I had heard many times before. It was the instantly recognizable sound of someone climbing the ladder which leads to the loft. It sounded exactly like someone was coming up towards me. I was frozen with fear, and again I was unable to move. My mind was a mess of fear and worry, as I had heard the sound of someone climbing. But then clarity came to me swiftly. I made up my mind to deal with whoever was coming up, and I was certain that I would see someone's head emerge in a matter of seconds. Those seconds felt like hours. The tension was unbearable. Nothing came into view, and then the sound stopped. It stopped at the top of the ladder. If someone was on that ladder, I would have seen them. It sounded like whatever came up the ladder was now in the loft with me. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I was sure there wasn't an intruder in the house, and as soon as that thought crossed my mind, my nightlight went out and I was plunged into absolute darkness. Then, close to my ear, I heard 3 words which chilled me to my core. "Who are you?" I cannot remember much after this point. I must have fainted. It was morning when I awoke. I don't know why, but I don't really feel the need to pursue or search for meaning or an explanation to this experience. I'm debating whether or not I should move out. I feel like it could just be the beginning of something, and there's definitely something bad in my apartment, and I don't think I'll be able to stand it if something happens again. I always hated going camping. My parents sent me to summer camp every year in Colorado, which involved at least one camping trip into the woods. Despite the brevity of these trips, I always resented them. The heavy bag, the lack of toilets, the spiders that always found their way into my tent. When I turned 16 and became a camp counselor in training, my distaste for the whole experience briefly changed. At that age, we were only a few years older than the oldest campers, but were given considerable leeway in what we were allowed to do. Most nights we would have to stay in the cabin with our campers, but it was rumored that the camping trip was a time where the counselors in training would get drunk, smoke weed, and hook up with each other after everyone else went to sleep. What I didn't know, however, was that the events of the camping trip would dissuade me from ever going camping in the woods again. The trip began like any other. Altogether there were around 30 people on the trip, 4 counselors in training, 4 counselors, and around 20 or so boys and girls between 13 and 14, walking in single file, lined up and down the various trails. You could hardly hear any sounds of nature over the conversation and laughter of the campers. Several hours went by, and we made our way through a dense marshy area and up a steep incline populated with evergreens and aspens. I wasn't the most athletic kid, so it was around this point that I found myself at the back of the line with one of the other counselors in training, Jordan, as well as 2 campers who were also struggling to keep up. The 4 of us started chatting, and in our distracted state, we began to fall more and more behind the rest of the campers, until the last of them faded out of view around a bend of around 50 feet up the way. Unconcerned, we kept walking at the same slow pace, but after half hour or so the trail started to level off, and I began to feel increasingly anxious. Not only had the rest of the group disappeared ahead of us, but we had entered a stretch of completely dead evergreens, half of which looked scorched by wildfire and the other half to have died from disease. The eeriness of the landscape was punctuated by a small, derelict cabin, sitting in the middle of the scorched forest, but seemingly untouched by the fire that must have spread through the area. We were so enthralled by this scene that one of the campers screamed when a twig broke behind us. Jordan and I started laughing a bit, but we quickly stopped when we turned to look at where the sound had come from. Not 20 feet behind us was a haggard-looking man with a messy net of black hair and a long black beard, slowly making his way up the trail with his eyes locked on us. He didn't appear to have any hiking supplies on him, and we had no idea how long he had been walking behind us. Being young, we were naturally pretty freaked out, but Jordan managed to give the guy a slight wave before saying to the rest of us, "Come on, let's speed up and get back to the rest of the group." As we turned to continue our way up the path, the man mumbled a question that was hard to hear, and I was shocked when Jordan turned around to ask the man to repeat himself. The man uttered again, slightly louder, "Going camping?" Jordan answered that yes, we were going camping, to which the man smiled slightly before stating in a creepy and ominous voice, "Best be careful." We nodded and gave a heartfelt thank you and were on our way. By this time, at a much faster pace, we began finding the rest of the group. Although the man had been walking up the same trail as us, when we saw him he didn't continue, but instead just stood there in the middle of the trail watching us as we made our way up the winding path and vanished from his view. Finally, we managed to catch up with the rest of the group, who had been waiting for us, and we told the adult counselors about our interaction with the strange man. We finally managed to catch up with the rest of the group, who had been waiting for us, and we told the adult counselors about our interaction with the man. They just shrugged it off, telling us the guy probably lived in that cabin and just wanted to know what we were doing near his property. But still, I felt unnerved by the encounter, and when we finally arrived at the campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man had somehow followed us. Eventually, though, I put it to the back of my mind and managed to enjoy myself a bit. Everyone else had gone to bed, and Jordan and the other counselors in training from the boys' cabin had brought 2 warm mic harders that they had stole from the counselors' quarters, and I had taken out a joint that I had stashed away for this exact occasion. To avoid getting in trouble, we decided to hike out into the woods a bit to smoke the joint, and made our way to the edge of the river where we had to wash our pots and pans earlier in the day. The spot was eerily silent, and the thought of the man from earlier kept coming into my head. Assuming that I was cold, not anxious, Jordan gave me his blue hoodie, and this prompted one of the other girls to suggest that we switch tents for the night, so that I could sleep in the same tent with him and she could sleep in the same tent as the other boy. I had absolutely no problem with this, and after smoking the joint we made our way back to our tents, which were pitched slightly away from the others, and we discreetly sipped on the mic harders while telling scary camping stories. Some time passed, and one of the boys was in the middle of telling a rather muddled story that he was clearly making up on the spot, when he suddenly stopped. In the silence we could hear what sounded like footsteps crunching on pine needles about 40 feet away, near one of the other campers' tents. As we strained to listen to what was going on, the noises stopped, even though we assumed it was just one of the campers getting up to use the bathroom. Being stoned and hopped up from the scary stories, we decided to call it a night and go hide in our tents. Jordan followed suit, and we awkwardly made out before eventually going to sleep. I don't know what time it was, but it must have been quite late, when I suddenly woke up to the distinct sound of footsteps walking around near my tent. Shot with adrenaline, I tried to lay as still as possible and quiet my breathing. From the sound it was apparent that someone was less than 3 feet away from the front of my tent, seemingly pacing back and forth. I turned to wake up Jordan, but I was immediately put at ease when I saw that he wasn't next to me. Assuming Jordan was the one I had been hearing, I closed my eyes and I was just beginning to drift back to sleep when I heard the tent unzip. I felt Jordan lie down next to me, and after a few moments he puts his arms around me and begins to spoon me. After nearly drifting off to sleep again, I realized I had to go to the bathroom, and muttered something about having to go pee before beginning to unzip my sleeping bag. Seemingly annoyed by the noise, Jordan lazily turned over, pulling his hoodie over his head before going still again. Quietly, so not to wake him, I unzipped the tent and quickly scanned the campsite for any movement, comforting myself that Jordan had just gone to pee, and was fine. I put on my shoes and began making the trek across our campsite to the designated pee zone. I had just made it to the area and pulled my pants down when I heard rustling coming from the campsite, as if someone was rummaging through our supplies and bags. Still slightly drunk, I tried to pull my pants up, and in my haste, lost my balance and tried to catch myself with a branch that made a loud snapping noise when I grabbed it. I tried to gather myself as quietly as I could, but when I finally managed to look back up, I could see that there was a figure making its way across our campsite and in my direction. Before I could even think, I was blinded by the bright light of a flashlight shining directly in my eyes, and the light was getting bigger. So whoever it was, they were coming towards me. Frozen and panicked, the figure got 10 feet away from me before I heard Jordan's voice say, "Sorry, it's just me." I breathed a sigh of relief, but then Jordan asked me something that really confused me. "Have you seen my blue hoodie? I know you gave it back to me, but I think one of the campers might have taken it from my bag while I was sleeping." After a brief pause, I managed to stutter out, "But you were just wearing it when you were back in the tent." What he had said to me next made my blood run cold. "What are you talking about? It's been missing since we got back for the river. I even went back down there to see if I had left it there by accident, but after I couldn't find it, I thought I'd check the boys' bags, and that's when I saw you." My confusion quickly turned to sheer terror, as I realized that the man who got into the tent with me just moments prior hadn't been Jordan. Sensing that something was wrong, Jordan asked me what happened, and I managed to get out that whoever stole his hoodie was sleeping in our tent. Not believing me, Jordan insisted on walking back to the tent to check it out. As slowly and quietly as possible, we made our way to the side of the tent, and when Jordan flipped on his flashlight and shined it through the nylon lining, he let out a high-pitched scream. We could both see the clear outline of a man's shadow, lying still in our tent. What happened next was a bit of a blur, but we ran into the pod of tents on the other side of the campground where the older counselors were sleeping, and frantically unzipped their tents and started yelling for them to come out and that there was a man in our tent. I remember panic setting in as our counselors slowly and groggily woke up, but after some more frantic yelling they finally managed to understand the severity of the situation when a commotion broke out on the other side of our camp near our tent. By the time they ran to the scene, they only found an unzipped tent and a bunch of our things littered on the ground that the man had apparently knocked over or thrown during his escape. After that, we heard the counselors radioing back down to the camp to call the police, and we could tell that they were as scared as we were. I don't think any of us slept after that. Luckily, we only had to wait a few hours for the sun to come up, and by the time a few of the other counselors had arrived with guns to escort us back to camp. On our way back down, one of the other campers found Jordan's jacket tied around one of the trees on the path, like some kind of marker. Needless to say, he didn't want the hoodie back, and we just left it there. To this day, I can't say for certain that the man in the tent was the same guy we ran into on the trail, but his face, and that night, still haunt me. My brother is a truck driver, and as you can imagine, being on the road so often leads you to see some of the most terrifying things life has to offer. This one story he shared with me really shook him up, and it started when he pulled into a rest stop one fall afternoon. The fluorescent glows of the gas station lights illuminated the scene of a middle-aged woman in a vibrant pink Jeep surrounded by a flurry of small dogs on leashes. Intrigued by the spectacle, my brother watched for a moment before continuing with his routine. He climbed back into his truck, the hum of the engine providing a backdrop for his thoughts as he merged back onto the freeway. But minutes later, the tranquility of the drive was shattered by the sudden appearance of the pink Jeep, which was hurtling past him at alarming speed. Before he could fully process what was happening, the vehicle veered sharply to the left, tires screeching as it collided with the dirt median. The Jeep somersaulted through the air, a whirlwind of metal, before coming to a rest in a crumpled heap. As you can imagine, my brother was shocked and slammed on the brakes and leapt out of the truck, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Amidst the wreckage, the woman lay motionless in a shadow ditch, water seeping around her. Her head barely above the surface, she muttered about her beloved dogs. Heart pounding, my brother rushed to her side, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. Around them, the lifeless form of the dogs lay strewn across the ground in pieces, a disturbing sight. It wasn't before long that the ambulance was sent for the woman, who was still pleading for her dogs as she was taken to the hospital. My brother never knew her fate. My brother never did discover her fate. I'm a long-haul trucker. I see and deal with a lot of weird and scary stuff. There was this time I was traveling up US 93 in Nevada, heading to Portland, Oregon for a delivery. It was around 1:30 a.m., and I needed to stop and log my half-hour break. I found a wide spot and pulled off, did my logs up, and made myself a sandwich. While I was eating said sandwich, I noticed a vehicle pull in behind me. I did not get concerned about it, but kept an eye on it while I ate. Then it got strange. I noticed a figure in the headlight of the vehicle approach the back driver's side of my trailer, stop, and looked like they were rubbing the back side of my trailer with their hands. It was suspicious, so I got my pistol out of the lockbox back in the sleeper, cocked and locked it, and slid it behind my waistband and proceeded to climb out of the rig. I walked about 10 feet, keeping my hand on the butt of my pistol, and flicked my flashlight on and aimed it at the person. It was a man, a weird-looking fellow in a dirty, whitish trench coat, long, straggly hair and bald on top. He was rubbing something on the side of my trailer. I hollered at him to stop what he was doing, and he looked up at me, smirked, and without turning his gaze off me, starts walking towards me. I back my way to my door, keeping my hands on my pistol but not pulling it out. I did not feel like my life was in danger at the time. I opened my door and climbed into the rig, shut the door, and locked it. The dude walks up by my door, looks at me, still smirking. I'm thinking this dude is off his rockers, and my half-hour break is over and it's time to go. However, while I'm looking down at him and getting ready to turn the key, I feel my truck rock. I jump and look at my driver's side mirror. Nothing. Then I look over to check my passenger side mirror, and there on my step, face pressed against my passenger side window, is a freaky, perfect replica of an old witch, smiling with a rotten tooth, cocking her head left, then right, and fogging up my window. Needless to say, I about sucked my seat up to my ass, but that's not the end of it. The dude then jumps up on my driver's side step and proceeds to start licking the window. Then the witch lady starts smacking the window with the palm of her hand over and over. The dude starts telling me to open up, that they're friendly, and insists to know what I have in the trailer. Now I feel threatened. I pull the pistol out and the chick immediately disappears off the passenger side step. The dude laughs, jumps up and down on the step, then grins, touches his finger to his nose and jumps off my step. I fired my truck up and took the hell off. Never did see any headlights following me, thank God. Disturbing travelers, let's not meet again. Many years ago, I was doing what is called a meet and turn. This is where a driver that is domiciliated out of a city will drive halfway to its destination, while a driver domiciliated out of that destination will drive halfway with a load that is destined for my city. We meet in a parking lot, switch trailers and drive back home. I had been on this run for a few months and found that I always got to the meet point about an hour before the other driver. It was a dark and empty dirt lot at 3 a.m., so I would stretch out across the seat and take a short nap. One night, about 10 minutes into my nap, I was awoken by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but it carried on for several minutes and got louder as the dog got closer. Soon it became apparent the dog was right outside my truck barking at me. Okay, either this dog is Lassie and trying to alert me of something, or else he's just a pain in the ass and I need to throw something at him to scare him off. It's important to note, the barking had been going on for a good 10 minutes at this point. So I sat up and looked out the window. Standing there, mere inches on the other side of the glass, was a man of about 35. He was a large fellow, and it was he barking at me. His eyes were crazy, and he was frothing at the mouth a little. This scene really held my full attention for a moment. The sheer creepiness of this struck me. Gently, and making an absolute minimum of sudden movement, I reached down and started my truck and slowly pulled away. He chased me, much like you might expect an angry dog to do, barking the whole time. Needless to say, it played hell with my power naps from then on. Back in the good old late 90s, my dad was a long-haul trucker. He would leave on Sunday night and usually not be back until late Friday or sometimes even Saturday, if he came home at all. My mother would, understandably, get annoyed by this, so once in a while my dad would take the whole family, my mother, younger sister of 4, and myself at 14. So we'd been out in either western Texas or possibly New Mexico, and were heading back east, probably to one of the Carolinas honestly, but I don't recall for sure. This was a usual route for my dad, and we spent a lot of time driving through Texas. So we were near Dallas, maybe a few miles east of. and traffic going both ways is gridlocked, all 6 lanes. At points, we'll move for a bit, but rarely break 35 miles an hour, and it's excruciatingly slow. We are stuck in this for 3 hours. The CB radio is dead quiet, which is strange, and finally we catch a break, and traffic is starting to move again. About 15 minutes later, we found out why traffic had backed up. In the ditch in the middle of the highway is a completely burnt out shell of a car, what appeared to be a station wagon. Pulling out into the highway, leaving the scene, was a line of 3 hearses. To this day, it's one of the most heartbreaking and disturbing things I have ever witnessed. I went camping with 6 friends last summer. We hired a small campsite in the mountains. It was a really great time, actually. We set off fireworks and had a barbecue. It was perfect. There is something so peaceful about sitting and watching a roaring bonfire, isn't there? By midnight, everyone was pretty much tuckered out, and we decided that it might be time to hit the hay. We all settled in for the night, and I don't know if I was the first to hear it, but I'm confident that before the night was out, we all heard it. There was a low kind of moaning or groaning sound coming from somewhere deep in the woods. If I had to put an age on it, I would say middle-aged, and I would say the owner of that voice was likely a woman. At points I did wonder if it was an animal, but there was something so human-like to that voice, it convinced me that it couldn't be from an animal. Clearly human. There was a certain sadness to the quality and tonality of the voice. It was rather unnerving. It was weird because we were pretty much in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't see any other campers in the area that we hired. I remembered gathering firewood and thinking, well, we're the only ones out here. There weren't any houses or cabins nearby. I didn't know who could be out here making these weird noises in the middle of the night. The voice, the moaning and groaning voice, only lasted for about 10 minutes, before it just sort of ended. In the morning, my friends and I spoke about what we had heard. We later ran into another group around the campsite, and we asked if they had heard the creepy wailing noise. They said they had. These guys were older than us, and it looked like this wasn't their first camping trip. When we spoke to them, they confirmed they were regulars to this particular campsite. We mentioned the screaming sound we had heard the night before, and they smiled at one another with a knowing glance and told us the following. From this point, it's kind of like an urban legend. It's up to you how much faith you put into our claims, but since you asked, I guess you want to know. This here used to be a site for kids' camps, summer camps. It isn't that way anymore, as you can tell. The reason for that was a disappearance. It happened on an all-girls school summer camping trip. They were learning about forestry and nature. Used to have an awful lot of camping trips around here, and something changed after that night though. It was as if the soil went sour or something. So the teachers were all up in arms because a student went missing. They turned desperate as the minutes crawled by. But this story doesn't have a happy ending. They found her all right, hanging from a tree limb. The rumors were that the poor girl was relentlessly bullied. If the teachers didn't notice the student was missing for a few hours, I doubt they noticed any kind of bullying. The teacher who found her apparently quit shortly after. She couldn't cope with the guilt or the shock, and during the search, she was one of the ones who was most vocal. She was the one calling out her student's name. She was the one who couldn't bear the shock of letting her students down. She took the same way out as her students, sadly. So, we all came to the conclusion that the groaning and moaning sound perhaps isn't the voice of the student at all, but of the guilt-ridden teacher, still searching for her student, bound to the earth by the guilt she feels. We all trembled. I did wonder if it was all a ploy to make sure noisy young men with fireworks didn't return to their tranquil campsite sometime later, but that moaning sound was so real and so creepy. Last year I moved home. I changed job in the autumn. At the time it was my 6th job change. It just wasn't working out. It didn't seem to ever work out back then, and I had less than a month to find somewhere to live before my job started, and it was in a new city. I didn't have much time, but I managed to arrange a viewing for 5 apartments that met my needs, and I was excited to see what they looked like in person. I knew it was going to be difficult, but at least I had a few options. One of the apartments that I arranged to view was the one my wife had high hopes for. She really liked it. The rent, the size, the age of the place and area all seemed fantastic. We really wanted it. It would be great for the new job too. A 5-minute walk to the station, and work was about a half-hour commute away. It seemed perfect. We wanted that one, but I felt like I needed to see the place in person and check out the area. Plus, I had 4 others to check out too. We were supposed to go and check out the apartment together, but we got some unexpected news. My wife was pregnant. I said that I would go alone so that she could have the morning to tell everyone, you know? I scheduled the viewing for the apartment we wanted the most at the end of the day, my last appointment. Well, I wasn't impressed with the first few apartments. They either made a mistake with the listing or weren't entirely honest with me. For example, the size of the apartment wasn't described for the first one, and the second one they said would be a 5-minute walk to the station, but it was a 25-minute walk at best. The other one was a bit weird. The photos on the website didn't match what it looked like in reality, but in person, the apartment looked like it had been dragged from the 80s. I didn't get why people couldn't be honest. It dampened my hopes for my final apartment viewing. I was getting a bit nervous. All our eggs were in this one basket now. I couldn't believe how much time I had wasted. By the way, it was the same real estate agent on each apartment viewing, and I had really grown to dislike him by this time when we reached the final appointment. I almost walked away. I hadn't ever experienced this kind of service before. He said something along the lines of, "Well, I guess you're nearly out of options, but I think this last apartment will meet your needs." I didn't care for his tone or jokey attitude. When we arrived, I noticed that the exterior of the building looked like it was a bit newer than as advertised. This real estate agent, seriously. It looked clean, and the realtor let slip that there was a cleaning crew who attended every week. It was a lot better than expected. The elevator was modern. The windows, they looked sturdy and safe, and it was looking good. Nice clear hallways, nothing piled up. That was good for us. And we used to have a neighbor who piled all kinds of junk in the hallway. Before I even looked inside the apartment, I had decided this was the one. I was getting good vibes. When I finally got in, I saw it had been freshly renovated. It was bright and clean, and I sent a picture to my wife of the cooker since I knew she was a fan of gas cookers rather than the electric types you often got in apartments, and she loved the look of the kitchen. Next, I saw the closets, and they were massive. I tried to take a bunch of photos, but most of them didn't work out properly. I had an old phone and tried to take pictures on my phone until I got a little embarrassing and just gave up. Finally, I saw a balcony, which looked amazing. It was nice and wide, and I saw myself drinking out there on summer evenings and my wife growing a few plants. As I opened the balcony door and stepped out onto the balcony, I felt something, an intense shiver, run through my body, and then my skin broke out in goosebumps. It was autumn, but it wasn't chilly. In fact, it wasn't a sunny day and there was no breeze. The feeling I felt was one of fear, rather than a change of temperature. Something wasn't right. I thought to myself, I'm not really sure I like this room. That moment, though, I thought that I suddenly felt a shove in my back. If it wasn't for the balcony railing, I would have gone tumbling over the 5 floors, and I would have perished. I instinctively turned to glare at the real estate agent, only to see him on the other side of the room. I knew he knew something. That was why he'd been setting me up with all the garbage apartments earlier. He wanted me to pick this one. He called out to me as if he were expecting it. "You all right, mate?" As if I had stumbled on the threshold to the balcony, which we both knew wasn't true. I know I didn't trip on anything, I was shoved. I didn't reply. What could I say? A moment or two passed, and I thought to myself, Well, I could have just been imagining things. Was I really going to turn down this dream apartment because I got goosebumps and potentially stumbled over something on the balcony? I decided to leave the apartment as calmly as possible. When I got outside, I made eyes with another resident on the same floor. It was a young woman. She appeared married by her ring. She locked eyes with me and shook her head slowly from side to side. I swear to God, if I could read minds, what I would hear would be her saying, "Stay out of there." I headed home to tell my wife about my disappointing and creepy experiences. She was annoyed. She said that we were about to miss our chance for a great apartment. She was really pissed for me not snapping it up. I kept telling her that there was just something off about that place and that we should keep looking for somewhere better. I started the search for somewhere new immediately, and during my search, I found a website that lists the histories of some properties. I searched for the apartment that I looked at where I felt the shove, and bingo, there it was. Someone had taken their life from jumping from that very balcony. I showed my wife, and for once she agreed that I did something good. I felt like we avoided something potentially dangerous. So much for the apartment we wanted. Last year I went on a solo hike with my tent in Mortis National Park in Germany. I hadn't really planned on the route precisely. I just wanted to walk north, and after walking through the forest for several hours, it was slowly getting darker, so I wanted to check Google Maps to see where the nearest place to camp was. Camping is prohibited directly in the national park forest, however I had no reception there, which I hadn't considered beforehand. So I walked on for a while and eventually came to a small settlement in the middle of the national park. There were maybe 5 houses and a small chapel right next to a small cemetery. Since the sun was slowly setting and I needed a place to camp, I decided to ask someone who lived there. An old man was sitting in one of the gardens in front of the houses, and I explained my situation to him, and he offered me to sleep on the meadow next to the cemetery. Since I had no other option, I graciously accepted the offer, so I set up my tent there and made myself comfortable and fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up. I heard a child's voice, and I sat up abruptly. Initially thought I'd only dreamt it, and I listened to the silence of the night for a few more seconds. Just as I was about to lie back down, I suddenly heard a child's voice clearly whispering, "Hello? Who are you?" My eyes were wide open. After a few seconds, I responded out of pure fear, "I'll be gone tomorrow, I promise." Shortly after, I heard footsteps running through the grass, moving away from my tent. I couldn't make sense of that situation. I was in shock and extremely tired, and at the same time, I sat upright in my tent for probably an hour or so and thought about what had just happened, but I couldn't come to any meaningful conclusion. After succumbing to exhaustion, I fell back asleep. The next morning, as I was dismantling my tent, I saw the man in his garden again. I went to ask him if there were any children living in this settlement. He looked at me in surprise, and after thinking for a moment, he told me that the last child had lived here over 50 years ago, but had sadly drowned in a lake nearby and was then buried in the cemetery right next to where I had camped. To this day, I don't know what to make of this story, but for me, it was definitely the creepiest experience I've ever had in my life, and I won't be forgetting it in a hurry. When I was young, it took about half an hour by bike to get to school. There was a bus, but the bus cost money, and I didn't want to ask my parents for bus money all the time. Money was kind of a taboo subject in our family back then, so I was happy to go on the bike. The route to school was simple enough. It was north to head to the school and south to go home. There was a river flowing halfway through the route from east to west. There were 2 routes you could choose though. The first route goes alongside the river on the north side, but there is a national highway on that side, so there's a lot of traffic even at night. It's a little dangerous. The other route was on the other side of the river, the opposite side of the highway. This way was a lot more peaceful. There were only a few houses out there. You also had the nicer, scenic views. You could see the mountains, countrysides, fields, and of course the dense forest. If you take this route at night, it's really unlikely that you will pass by car, a bike, person, or anyone. There were rumors that route, some people said ghosts appeared on it. There were literally no streetlights. Most of the students at my school avoided the route on the way home. Not me though. I had ridden through the forest on that side with my dad since I was a kid. I knew the way so well that when I came home late, I would turn the lights off on my bike and rely solely on the moonlight to guide me. It was relaxing. I would listen to the sound of the river. There was a really cool part of the woods where the branches of trees had created this kind of natural arch. It looked like right out of a storybook and I loved it. On the night that this experience took place, I was heading home late from school. I took part in a lot of club activities, so it wasn't uncommon to be home late. It was already past 9 p.m, and I had stayed late to speak to friends. Someone said that a typhoon was coming. We were all hoping that our school would be closed tomorrow, so we didn't mind staying a little late if we weren't going to hang out tomorrow. The warm breeze was strong, so I decided to head home before the weather turned, and I chose my usual route home through the forest just in case it rained. The clouds were looking low and grey. My bike had a kinetic energy-powered light bulb, so if I hit a switch it would just make the pedaling a little harder, but it would provide light. I hit the switch, but the light didn't come on. I guess the bulb had burst. This is just what I needed, so I just pressed on and hurried home before it rained. It was so dark out, but my eyes had grown accustomed to the darkness, and I was able to keep going with confidence along the roads, but I had to slow as I entered the forest. As I entered, I felt something was different. I felt a little frightened of the woods that night, but I told myself I didn't need to be scared. The forest is creepy at night, but it's the hole in the ears that lets the fear in the absence of light, and the weather didn't help. I just pushed those thoughts to the back of my mind and entered the woods. The headwinds grew stronger as I passed through, which made pedaling harder. I just had to get home though. All of a sudden there was a weird smell which was accompanied with the wind. It reeked. Then I thought I could see something popping up and down out of the darkness ahead. I stared forward, puzzled, and that was when I felt something grab my left shoulder. I'd never been scared of the forest, but that night changed everything. I pedaled as fast as I could, making a voiceless scream against the wind. My heart was racing. I was terrified. I put some distance between myself from where I left the hand on my shoulder and thought to myself, whoa, I finally had a paranormal experience. Hope that's the end of it. I kept riding. I was powered by adrenaline. I swear I heard something behind me. I didn't have the courage to look behind though. There was even less visibility than before. I hated it. Thankfully the path had widened and was largely flat. For some reason I shouted the name of my dog, and then I pedaled noticeably faster. I got through the forest and I began to see the welcome sight of the neighboring houses and the branches in the trees. I still didn't have the courage to look back and check to see if anything was following me. When I came out of the woods, there was a convenience store just on the other side of the bridge. I chose that point to look behind me, and there was nothing chasing me. I felt my heart rate slow. I locked my bike up outside the convenience store and headed in, and I have never been so happy to hear the sound of the entry bell in my life. I got even happier when I saw that a couple of friends were standing by the magazine rack. They laughed and said that I looked like I'd just seen a ghost. I chuckled with them. I was too embarrassed to tell them what happened. One of them looked at my shoulder with a grimace, then asked, "Mate, what happened to your shoulder? It's filthy." The fear came rushing back to me. I looked at my shoulder, and there were some disgusting stains there. Immediately I unbuttoned my shirt and hurled it in the trash. My friends all laughed and asked what the hell I was doing. I just got on my bike and left. When I got home, my mum asked me about what happened and why I wasn't wearing my goddamn shirt. I said that I just forgot it at school. Dinner was ready for me and I was hungry, chowed it down, and was eating when clarity and rationality arrived, and I came to the conclusion that perhaps something from above in the trees had fallen, blown by the wind, and landed on my shoulder. Perhaps it wasn't a paranormal experience. With that in mind, I felt kind of embarrassed about how I acted at the convenience store. I was a little scared, so I got my big sister and the dog to stay in my room that night. Unfortunately, school wasn't closed the next day. The typhoon never hit our area, so I had to go to school. Great. However, thanks to my canine best friend, I was able to sleep well, and when I woke up I started to think that I had created a scene out of nothing. The embarrassment hadn't faded. I had breakfast with the family, grabbed my umbrella and went to school. I chose the other route to go to school that morning. I took a look at the forest when I got to the bridge, and it didn't look that daunting, but I still didn't want to go in there. On that day during lunch, I heard a story. I heard something that would justify my fears out there in the deep dark woods. I wasn't the only one who had an encounter in the forest. There was a boy at school who was delivering newspapers. He was a few years older than me and my friend group, but my sister knew him. His job was to deliver newspapers in our area, and a small village just beyond the edge of the forest. So like me, he used the forest to go to and from his newspaper route. He would make these deliveries early, like really early. He was out on his bike at 5:30 a.m. at the crack of dawn. He would head through the woods as usual, and stopped still in his tracks when he saw a body swinging in the morning breeze, the body's neck hanging crooked from a tree limb. This is where mine and his stories crossed paths. I don't think I was grabbed on the shoulder that night. No, I think it was the clatter of some dangling foot that brushed my shoulder. I don't know if the individual who chose to take their life could have been saved at that point, but there is one thing I do know. Had the light on my bicycle worked, I might have been able to do something to save them if it wasn't too late. I think about that night more often than I'd like to admit. If the light had been working, maybe things would have been different. And these days, I don't go into the forest anymore. This happened before a national holiday, not too long ago. I didn't have school the next day, and that was always a huge cause for celebration. But I was kind of up late for my age. It was about 10:30. I was in high school back then. I'll just have to quickly explain my family dynamic because it will make sense later. When I was younger, my father sadly passed away, and my mum works all the time, and I live with my grandparents. That night my granddad was out, and my grandma was somewhere downstairs. I was studying for exams, high-pressure stuff I was supposed to care massively about for some reason. I was more interested in my music back then, to be honest. I used to listen to my tunes through my PSP, and I was taking a break from studying. Gotta give my eyes a rest. So I set down my PSP and leaned back on my chair and closed my eyes for a minute. I opened them and looked at my bedroom door. I noticed something in that moment that sent my head into a tizzy. It was this figure of a person who wasn't a family member, just this shadowy shape peering at me from around the door of the room across the hall. Across the hall was an empty room. There was no logical reason why that shadow should be cast in that room at all. At first I thought that my mum or grandma had left the window open to air out the house, and I was seeing a very human-looking curtain position, or said curtain being caught on the balcony or something. It seemed highly implausible though, especially since the way it was, it appeared to be leering around the door to look at me. It was no trick of the light. I watched that shadow then emerge from the spare room and enter the hallway. It was like it was fixated on me. Even though it was dark, I could tell by the movements of that thing that it was facing me. It crept around the door, into the hallway with its back against the door on the hallway wall. I then watched it as it slowly backed off towards the stairs, and before I could see it descend the stairs, it disappeared. Here's the weird thing. It looked like it was the same height as me, and by its silhouette, it looked like it had the same hair and clothes I had on. It's quite challenging to explain, really. Now, like I said, it was just my grandma and I in the house at the time. She didn't go upstairs much because she has bad hips, but if it was her, I would recognize her silhouette, and surely she would hit a light or something. I was left there in my chair shuddering, trying to understand what I had just witnessed. What does it mean? Something that kind of looked at me was looking at me from the other room? Why? For what purpose? Was this some kind of spirit or a shadow person? Did it leave because I spotted it? What would have happened if I didn't notice its presence? I was just horrified. When my brain searched for a logical answer and came back with none, it was just terrifying. I began to freak out and then thought, oh God, what if it returned? I didn't want to go downstairs because that would be the last place I saw that thing head off to, and I still have no idea what the hell it was, and I've lived in that house right until I moved out in fear that I would see this shadowy figure again, but thankfully, until now I haven't. I did wonder if it could have been a home intruder. I was young, but I'm not sure. I might have seen some features of the invader or their clothes, but I didn't. I never told anyone in my family about what happened that night because I would worry that they would laugh at me and call me weak, and I didn't want my mum to worry about me when she was out working so many hours. I do wonder if they would have believed me sometimes. It was spring of 2016. I had just turned 24 years old. My friend and I just reached our main spot to camp, Black Canyon Rim Campgrounds, just outside of Payson, Arizona. We usually traveled out here 2 or 3 times a year. It has some incredible views and is only a few hours away from the city. For the most part, this area was pretty secluded. A privately owned convenience store rested a few miles away with a small town 20 miles before that. The entrance was on a dirt road directly off the highway with a campground sign at the start of the road, marking local wildlife, any fire hazards, and general news relevant to camping folk. The paving is mostly linear, with maybe one fork spanning several miles. Once we traveled down the dirt road to see how far it would take us, one of the paths would take you to another highway entrance, with a ranger's tower halfway there. The other path led to a dead end. An abandoned cabin can be found on this path a few miles in, mostly hidden off in the distance behind some larger foliage. The snow had mostly cleared up at this point, leaving for crisp air, a slight chill, and fauna becoming active again. We'd usually spot some wild horses, several deer, and tons of little critters whenever we'd come out this way. It really was the perfect time of year for a relaxing trip to get away from the city for a few days. We had gotten in around 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was late for us, and we'd usually try to make it out of there by noon at latest. This trip was pretty spontaneous. We both had work during the coming weekend and decided to just go for it. The sun was setting fast, and we still hadn't picked our spot to camp. There were maybe 2 other groups, both families parked somewhat close to the entrance, only a few hundred yards away from the highway. This time around, we just wanted to get away from the humans for a while. Customer service jobs will do that to you. We drove down the dirt road, past our usual spot, and finally picked the perfect area. A small clearing just hanging off the edge of a hill. The whole valley could be seen from this area, with a beautiful sunset. This would have been our main spot from then on, if the next night's incident never happened, that is. We agreed to get a campfire going, and would just avoid building tents on this trip. We didn't have much time to do so anyway, and her car wasn't that uncomfortable. I'd sleep in the back seat, she'd take the passenger seat, with the window slightly ajar. We'd have a few blankets for each of us, and would fall into that unrivaled slumber. The next day went fairly uneventful. We just decompressed. I had this strange feeling throughout the day like I was being watched. There were crunching of leaves just out of sight every few hours, but I figured that it was just local wildlife doing their thing. My friend didn't notice anything unusual, so I didn't dwell on it. Night came, and the feeling still hadn't gone away. My friend must have felt something she didn't vocalize though. She took some of her sleeping pills, that she usually didn't need on our camping trips. The nature's ambience was enough to put anyone to sleep, I thought. It was nearing 1 a.m. My friend dozed off in the passenger seat while I attempted to wind down in the back. I leaned against the side window behind the passenger seat, legs outstretched to the car's back door. The window opposite of me was rolled down slightly, with a cold breeze flowing in. I had been on my phone scrolling through Facebook when I heard something outside. A few crunches of the fallen leaves, several paces outside the car. I whispered to my friend, "Did you hear that?" But she was already out. I put my phone down and listened intently for a minute or two, but there was nothing. It must have been a small animal, curious of the camp. I went back to my phone, scrolling through social media, and about 10 minutes had passed when I heard it again. A crunch right outside the door. I lowered the phone. My eyes took a moment to adjust from the light of the phone into the deep dark of the woods. As I turned the phone away from me, the backlight illuminated the window above my feet. To this day, I can't get the image out of my head. Two dirty, scabbed hands held onto the window. The fingers wrapped inside the car. The nails were long, unkempt, and dark. Behind the window, a silhouette of a face was pressed up against it. The breath would create condensation every few seconds, and all I could make out were the reflections of those empty, black eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. It felt like eternity. The staring contest between me and this thing. Thoughts were repeating incessantly in my head. Why haven't they run away when I noticed them? What were they planning? Was it the face of death? After probably 10 seconds of not doing anything, the hand slowly unclenched the window and receded into the darkness. The condensation on the window dispersed, and a few seconds passed before I heard the dreaded crunch, melodically fading into the distance. I, still, just sat there. What the hell just happened? Why didn't I do anything? Why am I still not doing anything? With that thought, my body shot into adrenaline. I pounded on my friend's seat, waking her up from her slumber in a dizzy confusion. I unlatched and kicked open the door, and took a moment to scan the area. Whoever they were, whatever it was, I scrambled to pick up any important camping supplies we left outside, and just crammed everything into the back seat and trunk, periodically looking over my shoulder, listening for those footsteps. I slammed the back door shut, and there they were. A grim reminder of the horror that had just happened. 2 handprints, imprinted on the window. I quickly wiped them off the window in a panic, a reaction to erase the evidence, I guess. I jumped into the front seat, started the car and floored it out of there. My friend finally coming, asking me what the hell I'm doing. "We gotta go. Someone's out there." I didn't see whatever or whoever it was while fleeing the scene. Speeding down the dirt road, my friend insisted I slow down, and eventually I did. We reached the highway and I proceeded to drive 20 or so miles before we reached a Denny's, when my friend asked for us to stop and eat and for me to explain everything. The nightmares subsided a few months later. My embarrassment continues to this day for the state of shock I was in at the time. Everyone says you either have a fight or flight instinct, and I'm confused whether I have either. I mean, I just sat there and did nothing. I guess mine was freeze. I frequently tend to ask myself who was out there. Another camper messing with us? A resident of the abandoned cabin down the dirt road? Or maybe something more paranormal lurking in the forest, watching lone, vulnerable campers as they drift off to sleep. In the years ahead, we would still go camping there, but never too far from the highway. Whatever it was, I hope that was the last I ever saw of it. This actually happened about 5 years ago, in a random country road in Tennessee. It was pitch black darkness, and the only things around were fields, hills, and me. Not a single house. I was getting really tired since the day before I just flew from Washington to Atlanta and was driving from Atlanta to northern Indiana, and out in the middle of nowhere, I see a dog in the grass. And normally this is fine, but its eyes weren't glowing from my headlights, which for some reason really made me feel unsettled. The next thing I know, it charged for the tire of my trailer, snarling and barking. Thank God I didn't hit it, and I looked back and it was gone. As bad as it sounds, even if I did hit it, I probably wouldn't have stopped because I was in the middle of nowhere with no service. I've heard a lot of people finding some way to get people to stop their commute in the middle of nowhere and just rob or kill them. It was midnight, and there was no way I was taking a chance. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real, probably around 7. He drove trucks decades ago before I was born, and before labor laws around limits and brakes were more standardized. I'm assuming it's different now. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift where he was driving 24, 36 hours or more without a break, longer than a quick bathroom or food stop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain. He's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something completely mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd regularly ask me things like, how long would it take us to get from the house to the store if we're going at 30 miles an hour but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road? He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing like the odometer, mileage marker, the time, and then he could test his speed based on the equation. One night, after having already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier, and the whole roll down the window and blast the music up didn't seem to be helping much. It was a rainy night, and on a pretty windy mountain road without a shoulder to pull over safely. So he started doing those logic games out loud in order to keep alert and awake. He was saying something to the effect of, I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be when I reach 200 if I'm going at 55? Then his eyes closed, took a deep breath, and felt his head do the nod-jerking thing which woke him up with a gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random-ass mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely back, but it was only a matter of seconds between that reality and absolute certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road, going over 60 miles an hour, only to wake up at the last moment between life and death. The story usually ends with him tearing up and saying, I don't know if there are angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I wouldn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today, and that's something that feels pretty damn close to spiritual. A good friend of mine told me this story years ago. He's the stereotypical big bad trucker. I've seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas along the border. He never batted an eye, but while telling me this story he had goosebumps and a concerned expression on his face, which from this guy is about the equivalent of a trembling lip and crapping himself. I'll tell this story in the first person, as that's the way he shared it with me. Years ago in the late 90s, I was on my way from the house, Central Texas, heading to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, maybe 4 or 5, and I had just come off a string of days at home, so I knew I wasn't tired. I'm on one of those 2-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of nowhere, when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first I just thought it was roadkill, as is usually the case, but when I get closer, I see that it is roadkill, and there's someone crouching over the deer carcass. I remember thinking either this guy is taking the antlers as a trophy or he's absolutely sick. As I get closer still, I can now see that this guy is eating the deer. He's pulling chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing it up to his face. At this point, he stops mid-motion and looks up at me. Not at the truck, but at me. It stands up, and that's when I see it's huge, brown, and covered in hair. I remember thinking at this point, oh crap, and thinking it's standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed, and I'm about to the point of the road he's standing in. I didn't even think of stopping. In fact, I'm starting to lay on it to get the hell out of there. And as I'm passing it, it's looking at me, not at the truck. It's looking through the driver's side windshield at me. He obviously had the intelligence to know that there's a driver in there and knows that's where I'm sitting. As I start to pass him, I can still see its head above the hood of an old needle-nose Pete. Old truck design, where the hood goes straight out from the windshield, known for being tall and difficult to see around. This thing is a giant. I remember seeing what appeared to be human intelligence in his eyes. It scared the crap out of me. I was at a truck stop in Arizona. I was pulling through the fuel island, and right as I was about to leave, roughly 15 cop cars came flying into the parking lot with a SWAT van. They surrounded a truck that was already parked for the night. I heard later that the driver had lost a tire or something off his trailer, and it had killed a guy on the side of the road. Don't know how true that story was, but it sounded plausible. At the old Flying J in El Paso, I had pulled through the fuel islands and was filling out logs and whatnot after filling up, when someone started screaming for help on the CB radio. It's not unusual to hear kids messing around or whatever, but this sounded like a full-grown man and didn't sound fake. It only happened for about 15 to 20 seconds and then silence. Some people started asking the guy where he was, but we never got a response. Suddenly, another big rig in the parking lot starts to take off right as a few cop cars pull into the truck parking area. The big rig takes out a smaller sign and then jumps a curb out onto the service road for I-10. Turns out a student got pissed at his instructor and stabbed him before leading the chops on a short, high-speed chase. I have only really had one scary experience worth sharing. When I was a student, I used to go camping by myself regularly. At one point, I was camping almost every weekend. I used to camp from Friday to Sunday out in the elements. I didn't mind where. I camped in cornfields and in the shade of mountains. With no real friends at college, I guess I was trying to suppress my loneliness by exploring nature. On the night that this took place, I got on the train and headed out with no real direction in mind. I didn't bring a map and didn't research where I was going to be camping. I was just winging it. I knew that there would be mountains where I was heading, so I figured I would easily find somewhere to camp. I got off the train and set off into the wilderness and eventually found a nice area between two mountains. It looked like a pretty safe place, so that's where I set up my camp for the night. I made a campfire dinner and then retreated into my tent to read a little. Before I knew it, it was almost midnight. It was a quiet night. There was a breeze, but it wasn't that cold despite being fall. I was comfortable in my tent. Well, that was until I heard the zipper at the front of the tent unzip. I panicked, but I tried to think logically at first. Was I trespassing on private property? Was someone here to move me on? Or could something worse be happening? I was worried that I was in danger. The tent flap was fully unzipped in a matter of moments, and then I saw a figure. A man was out there. He leaned his head into the tent, and I saw a face. It was just some old man. He looked very ordinary, the kind of guy you'd walk past in the street and hardly notice. As he leaned into my tent, he asked, "Are you traveling through here?" I couldn't wrap my head around what he was asking. I just shook my head from side to side to indicate no. And with that, the old guy zipped up the front flap and left. I was confused and pretty freaked out. I didn't spot a house in the area, and I think the closest one I saw was nearly a mile away. What the hell was this old guy doing out in the mountains so late? I started to wonder if I'd seen a ghost or something, but I knew deep down that I had seen a real person. But the absurdity of the situation had me questioning everything. Well, I guess that sleep was off the agenda for the night. I mean, there would be no possible way I was going to sleep with a guy out there. He was comfortable enough to open my tent, so what else was this guy capable of doing? I didn't know if he was a psycho, or if he was armed, or if he was a thief. I mean, he didn't look like any of those things, but I guess it's possible that he could have been all three. I couldn't sleep with that on my mind. While I was mulling over all of that, I heard the sound of the zipper being pulled again. The front flap opened, and this time a completely different guy stuck his head through the opening of the tent. He asked me more or less the same question. "Are you on a trip or vacation or something?" I shook my head to indicate no again. I didn't know how to answer this guy, and I wanted to give a similar answer to the first one I gave. I didn't know what they were testing. There had to be a point to their line of questioning. When he heard my response, he zipped up the tent again and seemingly walked off somewhere. The second guy was younger. He was middle-aged, again, a very ordinary-looking chap. I didn't know if I was being targeted or if this was the beginning of some kind of game, and I didn't plan on sticking around to find out, so I decided to pick up my things as fast as I could. I was worried though. I knew it was dark out there. There was no moon out that night, and you know how dark it can get in the mountains and the woods, right? I didn't see either of those guys carrying flashlights. It just kept getting weirder and weirder. I needed to plan my way out. I honestly spent close to 20 minutes imagining what kind of scenarios would happen when I set foot out my tent. I knew I wouldn't be able to see where those guys were, and they could come at me from any angle. I imagined a kitchen knife being plunged into my back. I had no choice though. I mean, I had to get out of the tent. I couldn't just sit there and wait for their first move. So, with my heart racing, I decided to step out. I equipped myself with my mag light for self-defense and slowly went out, but couldn't see anyone there. I thought that might be my chance to get all my stuff packed up and get the hell out of there. I was making promises with all the known gods that if I got out of there safely, this would be the last time I went on a solo camping trip. I was shoving things into my bag, but I stopped in my tracks when I heard the sound of approaching footsteps, and I looked up to see these two men's silhouettes. I just carried on with packing my stuff up, but then one of the men spoke. "You going home? It's the middle of the night." This time I replied and said something along the lines of, "Yeah, urgent call. I have to go." "We didn't hear a phone ring," one of them replied. I naturally turned to face them at this point. They knew I was lying. I shone my flashlight at them and saw that they were wearing dark robes. They had masks perched on top of their heads, as if they had just pulled them off their faces. There was something very disturbing going on out here. They stood there and watched me frantically get my stuff together. The thought came into my mind that really scared me. It was like my internal voice said to me, it was a short life. I really thought this could be the end. I thought that they were about to attack me. But they didn't do anything though. They just observed. I got my things and bolted. I heard something weird as I was running. I knew there were more people out in the mountains that night. I could tell there were. Footsteps, branches snapping, and I swear I heard someone laughing. But most chillingly of all, I heard what sounded like a chorus of voices begin to murmur something. I tripped and stumbled, and by the time I got to the foot of the mountain I was covered in unseen cuts and bruises. I spent the rest of the night at the train station and did not get any sleep. As soon as the first train arrived, I joined the morning commuters and got out of there. I must have looked like a wreck. I was getting some strange looks. I kept my promise. That was the last time I would go camping alone. It was a really terrifying experience. I don't know what those people were wearing robes and masks for out in the woods, and I don't want to find out. I have the feeling that I got away from something that night. Maybe it was down to the way I answered the questions they asked. Maybe they thought I was a local. I don't know. But if I told them I was on a trip, and that I wasn't from the area, maybe I wouldn't be sharing this story with you today. Oh, and for those of you interested, it was in Gifu, Japan. This happened when I was 26 years old. I was working at a pretty big company. I thought that I had it made, you know. I just graduated from university and had landed a really decent job. And I quickly realized that everything was not as it seemed. I tried to stick it out, but man, I hated that job. They took advantage of me. Every holiday request I put in was denied, and the hours were way longer than advertised. I saw no progression there, and everyone was horrible. I was exhausted and underappreciated, so I quit. I had to get another job pretty quickly if I wanted to afford rent, so I took a temp job in sales. It wasn't as stressful, and it wasn't as respectful, but I'd finally achieved a nice work-life balance. One thing I had to change, though, was my apartment. I used to live in a pretty swanky place downtown, but I could no longer afford that on the new job's salary, so I had to move somewhere a little cheaper. My new place was okay, I guess. I didn't really have much space, but it was decent enough. But then something strange happened. It happened when I was about a month and a half into my life at the apartment. I got home kind of late that night. I ran a bath and was heating up my dinner. I took my bath at around 11 p.m. and I was just relaxing. I had washed my hair and was feeling overheated. Since I lived alone, I had no issue to hop out the bath and run to the fridge to grab myself a cold drink. And that is exactly what I did. I opened the bathroom door and froze in place. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were wet footprints on the carpet. I was in the bath the whole time, and it wasn't raining that night, so I couldn't believe it. Those were not my footprints. The footprints led from the bathroom outwards into the lounge. I wrapped a towel around myself and cautiously followed the footprints. They went from the bathroom through the lounge into the hall and into my bedroom. They seemed to stop at my bed. At first I thought, oh God, someone's broken in and they're hiding under my bed. So I carefully backed out of the dark bedroom and headed to the kitchen. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen to protect myself. I had no idea of what would come next. It was an incredibly tense and stressful situation, but I knew I had to react. I had to do something. I summoned all of my courage, stormed into my bedroom, hit the lights and looked under the bed. But there was nothing but a pitch-black empty space staring back at me. No one was there. My heart was racing. I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. I went to the door and checked that it was locked. It was locked, with the chain. There was no sign that it had been kicked in or tampered with at all. I was relieved, sure, but the mystery of the wet footprints wasn't resolved. I couldn't escape the fear of the unknown. What the hell was that? I went back to the bathroom, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I quickly rinsed my hair off. Man, that was a horrible few seconds. I dried my hair with the back to the wall, terrified, yet trying to compose myself. I had to go to bed, but there was no way in hell I would be sleeping in the dark that night. I got into bed and surprisingly, I felt as though I wouldn't have much trouble sleeping. Perhaps I was more tired than I realized. I don't know how long I'd been asleep, but suddenly I woke up. I'm not sure if it was because I was sleeping with the lights on. I usually sleep in the dark, and it's always hard to stay asleep or fall asleep with the light on for me. It was like it was dark outside still. You know that feeling when you wake up in the middle of the night, and you feel as if it's morning but it isn't? I guess it was kind of like that. I had a faint sound coming from somewhere down the hallway. It was the sound of the bathroom opening. I gripped the covers as tightly as possible. My fingers must have been turning white from the pressure I was applying. I froze. I was praying that it was just my imagination, but I was wrong. I heard what sounded like footsteps next. The footsteps sounded sort of wet. Whatever that was, it was making that noise and left those footsteps while I was in the bath and now heading towards the bedroom. I guessed that they were coming towards me, just like the footprints I saw when I got out of the bath, to the lounge and through the hall and finally the bedroom. I cannot describe how terrifying that was. Hearing footsteps in my home coming from the bathroom, I knew that I was the only person in the apartment. I knew the doors were locked. I knew there was no one hiding as I had searched while armed, and the squelchy footsteps seemed to mock my belief in logic. They were absolutely unexplainable. They were paranormal. The footsteps didn't rush or move at what I would be describing as a normal pace. It was stilted and slow pace. At some points, I swear, it was as if 10 seconds had passed between each step. And I'm in bed, trying to rationalize everything, hoping that my brain can guide me to an explanation. I tried to believe that I was wrong. Maybe it was street noise or a neighbor. But in my heart, I knew I was wrong. Those footsteps were getting closer. My back was facing the bedroom door, and the covers were over my head. I could sense something approaching. If I'd have dared pop my head out of the safety of my covers, I swore I would have seen a breath of fog. All the while, the squelching footsteps are getting louder and louder, and I'm just laying in bed, screwing my eyes as tightly shut as possible. All the while, the squelching footsteps are getting louder and louder as I'm just laying in bed, screwing my eyes as tightly shut as possible. All I could do was shiver. The footsteps finally approached my bed, and I felt what I can only describe as a cold gaze fall on my back. I was very, very aware that I wasn't alone. I know this sounds hard to believe, but what can I say? A couple of agonizing seconds go by, and then something happens. The feeling of being glared at, the icy chill to the room, and the footsteps all went away. Then I heard the sound of something shuffling and maneuvering itself under my bed. The room was silent except for that one sound, and it sounded like something held its breath, as if to make itself comfortable under the bed. What could I do? I just stayed silent. I couldn't bear the tension, yet I couldn't summon the bravery to move. How long was I like that? I don't know. A minute? I say that because that minute is definitely longer than a minute. An hour? Half an hour? My perception of time was out the window. And then, a horrific sound filled the room. A terrible trill. I knew the sound and it came from my alarm clock. I set it to go off every morning at 6 a.m. and I hurriedly reached for my phone and turned the alarm off. I don't know why, but all I can say is that when I woke up, I guess I was asleep maybe. Anyway, when it was 6 a.m., I didn't think that there was a presence under the bed anymore. I took the plunge, leant over the side of the bed, my hair touching the ground, and peered into the space underneath. Again, there was nothing but darkness looking back at me. But I will say that the space underneath my bed did look a little damp. After that, I had to move out. It was hell. It wasn't ever as bad as that after that night, but on multiple occasions before I left, I heard doors open, drawers open, and the drip, drip, drip of water in the bathroom. I would love to know what happened in that apartment before I got there, but I'm not in a hurry to find out. It was terrifying enough. A buddy of mine and I try to camp twice a month. Now that I have a vehicle that can be trusted to get me to some of the more remote areas of our state. We planned a camping trip for this past weekend. We chose a fairly remote location than we had been the previous weekend. The previous weekend we were the only people within a 1-mile radius of our camp spot. Friday night rolls around and we got there and set up. This story takes place Saturday night at around 9 p.m. so the sun is long gone and the moon hasn't quite risen yet. It's pitch black out, and other than what our fire lights up, we can't see anything. Suddenly, from the darkness we hear a man screaming. We listen intently, silently sharing an anxious look. At first we were hoping it was someone drunk and having a little too much fun, but it quickly becomes obvious this isn't fun party screaming. It isn't even like he's hurt. It sounds so full of despair, anger and anguish. I'm going to take a moment to remind you that at this point it's 9 p.m, pitch black at night, in the middle of nowhere in the woods 5 miles from the nearest cell phone signal, and we hadn't seen anyone for hours. This screaming persists for what feels like hours, but was probably no more than 5 minutes. We had no idea what was making it, and started feeling extremely paranoid. We gathered up anything remotely close to a weapon and tried to come up with explanations of the screaming while keeping our eyes on the forest around us. After about 15 tense minutes of fear-induced paranoia, I nearly fell out of my seat as I watched a flashlight and a lantern slowly enter our camp. I greeted the stranger with a basic, "How's it going?" before he was even lit up by the fire. He responded quickly but flatly, asking if we could do him a favor. "That depends on the favor," my buddy and I said in unison, obviously tense, holding our weapons close to us. The stranger proceeded to ask if he could hang out with us for a second by the fire. Given the two of us, plus our assortment of weapons gathered from around our camp to within our arm's reach, we decided to let him do so. After a short second of awkward silence, I asked him what the hell was going on, and he proceeds to tell me and my buddy that he was camping down the trail with his buddy, and that his buddy had snapped and tried to kill him. "Wait, what?" I said before the thought even finished processing in my head. "Is that the screaming we heard earlier?" The man slowly nods, staring blankly into the fire, and begins to share his tale. "We were just hanging out, man. We came up early today and my buddy just freaked out. He started screaming and screaming, then wouldn't stop. Then he attacked me. He lunged at me. I told him to back off and chill, you know, but he kept on coming. It started getting pretty violent and I'm pretty sure he was going to kill me, so I grabbed my car keys, the lights, and ran. I didn't know what to do. He chased me when I ran. We don't have firearms or anything, but we do have a hatchet." My buddy and I looked at each other for a second, completely astonished. Then something horrible dawned on me. "Wait, he chased you like he's on his way here right now?" The man just slowly nods in reply. And right on cue, like some terrible horror movie come to life, we hear screaming, maybe 30 feet from our camp, down on the main trail. "I just want your balance, Gary! I want your balance, Gary! Gary, where are you, Gary?" I'd never in my life heard a man scream like that. I'd never heard anything like it in my life. It was a brutal, guttural scream that was shrill to the ears yet deep in pitch. The sound of someone gone completely mad, and the way he said the stranger's name would switch erratically from long and sing-song to short, guttural punches of sound. We killed our lights, became silent and listened. By some miracle, the madman didn't notice our camp and continued walking down the trail screaming the whole way. We ended up chatting with Gary for hours, listening to the screaming getting further and further away. We'd come to find out they had taken 5 grams of magic mushrooms each, and his buddy, who we'll call Ty, was a co-worker of his and was fine for 3.5 hours, then suddenly snapped. It seemed as though Ty thought he would kill Gary and steal his good trip. We hear the screams get further and further for over 2 hours. By this time it's 11 p.m. The moon is starting to come out, and it's below 30 Fahrenheit. Ty had no jacket or flashlight according to Gary. My buddy and I are way too drunk to drive out of camp to get cell service, as it was snowy and icy and required 2 to 3 miles of hiking and then driving after getting off the trail. Gary was still lightly feeling the effects of weed and mushrooms, so he couldn't drive either, and we had to make the decision to let the guy wander, hope he sobered up and could find his way back. And he did, right into our camp. We heard yelling after an hour of no screams, maybe 30 to 50 feet from the camp. "Help, please, I'm lost!" And we can tell the man's walking from the woods into our camp. We tell Gary to hide just in case and greet the man with me carrying my 12-gauge shotgun and my .40 caliber pistol holstered. My buddy's carrying his AK-47 style rifle and his two 9mm Glocks holstered, and with our flashlight on our brightest setting in his face. He was about 6'3" and 300 pounds. We talked to him, decided he was calm enough to walk with, and walked with him back to camp. He seemed really remorseful, said he blacked out and didn't remember a thing. He had fallen out with his buddy, and we escorted him to camp down the trail, returned and told Gary that Ty seemed cool, and if anything else happened to scream and come running, and that we would help him out. It ended up being a happy ending. We made friends with Gary and I got his phone number to make sure the next day he got back to town safely, back to his wife and kid, and we're planning a camping trip with him soon. But Ty, who wandered screaming like a deranged lunatic into the forest, potentially wielding a hatchet to murder your friend to steal his good trip, or whatever your psychosis-filled mind was thinking, for the love of God, let's not meet again. Whenever my sister asked me to babysit my niece, I used to take her out. She really loved the mountains, the forest, especially the winding roads. We saw a sign which said, "Driving course." I guessed at the time there was an event of these that would be coming up. So I figured that since it was a quiet kind of evening, I could take my niece along the course. It was open to the public and I wasn't trespassing or anything. We were having a great time chatting and driving through the mountain roads, seeing all sorts of stuff along the way like hot springs and nocturnal wildlife. We stopped at a restaurant along the way. It was a really nice change of pace. I work in an office and rarely get to see much of nature on my time off, so I was happy that my niece convinced me to take her on a ride. After eating, we both wanted to keep on going through the driving course. It was so much fun. I was picking up a little speed, and we were both having a great time, when my niece spotted a little dirt road off the side of the mountain pass and pleaded with me to take her down there. It was getting a little late, but I couldn't resist giving in to her demands. I told her that after we'd had a little look we would turn right back, and she agreed. It turned out that going off-road was an awful idea. We had got about 200 meters down the dirt road when I hit something with my front right tire. I don't know what the hell I did to the car, bent the axle or something. It was a pretty harrowing experience to realize that I was in trouble and responsible for my niece. We were both shaken up. We hit a rock or something big enough for it to cut the engine. To be honest, I'm surprised the airbags didn't go off. I was the adult and had to be calm, but honestly I was so nervous. I'm a woman, and, well, it was just me and my niece out in the middle of the dark, mountainous woods, with each passing moment, it getting darker and darker. I got my phone from my purse and went to dial my roadside rescue service, but I had no signal. I started to get vibes from horror films I watched as a teen, but I knew I had to push my fear aside for the sake of my niece. I didn't know what to do. There was no way I would be able to leave my niece in the car and walk down the mountain to the nearest building, which I guess would have been the restaurant. For some reason my niece wasn't very frightened by the situation. Perhaps she felt a little guilty in hindsight. She didn't freak out or start crying. She handled the situation pretty maturely, and I was very grateful for that. I told her that we had a few options. We could wait there, lock the doors, and then, when there was a bit more light, I could go off, or try and get some signal to make a call, and that would mean leaving her in the car. She didn't want to be left alone in the dark. I could have guessed that much. I tried starting the engine, but of course had no luck. It seemed as if we were in a really bad area when the wind whistled through the trees, and it frightened me. There are wild things in the woods, and they had the cover of darkness on their side. We sat there for a while chatting, trying to lighten the tension, and then my niece started to yawn. I checked my phone to see what time it was, and was shocked to see that I somehow had a bar of signal. I called roadside rescue instantly. The phone held its signal long enough for me to ask for help. I was told to just sit tight and lock the doors, and wait for the recovery vehicle to arrive. I guess we both ate quite a lot at the all-you-can-eat place earlier, and I was feeling quite drowsy too. I closed my eyes for a while. I must have snoozed, because when I looked over at my niece, I saw she was fast asleep. It was colder and darker when I woke up. There were new rustling sounds in the darkness, and the wind was blowing the leaves from the trees. I was frightened. That's when I heard a horrible noise. It sounded like a voice. It was distant but sounded like it was getting closer, and I couldn't really tell how far away it was. This indescribable wail crossed with a screech was approaching, I knew that much. I thought that it could be my imagination making things more frightening than they were. My mother always said that it was the hole in the ear that lets the fear in, and the absence of light. I told myself that if I just closed my eyes, whatever was frightening me would pass. The sound stopped. It sounded like it stopped right beside the car. A few agonizing seconds crawled by, and I realized that I couldn't convince myself that it was my mind playing tricks on me any longer, and I felt as if there was a very real threat outside the driver's side door. I slowly opened my eyes and turned my head to face the window, and I saw nothing but a dark figure there. It was like there was something completely covered in black pressed up against the window. I don't know how to describe it better. It was a solid black mass. I lost it when I saw that. I instinctively released the handbrake and tried to start the engine. To my surprise, it spluttered to life. I hit reverse and saw the thing in the light of my headlights. It looked like a person wearing a black cloak. My niece woke up, but thankfully I don't think she saw it. If she did, she never mentioned it. I managed to reverse back to the start of the dirt road and waited there for roadside rescue to arrive. When we were towed from the woods back to a light source, I looked to the driver's side window, and there were handprints and smudges of what looked like a face on the glass. It really frightened me, and I'm so glad I didn't leave my niece in the car to search for signal. I have no clue what that thing wanted, but I guess that it wouldn't have been anything remotely positive. This happened when I was in elementary school, roughly 11 years old. My parents were called away urgently because one of my aunties or uncles were in need of some urgent childcare. I remember it was a Saturday and my parents planned to leave at dusk, and I was tasked with keeping an eye on my cousin since I was the eldest. I had a choice to go with my parents, and I wish I had, but it seemed more fun to stay at home with my cousins. The cousins in question were a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. They were siblings. They kept nagging at me to go and play with them. I couldn't take it anymore and buckled to the persistent requests from my little cousins. The younger sibling demanded a game of hide and seek. I didn't mind that. I wasn't too cool for a game of hide and seek, and I thought that if I let them go and hide, I would have a couple of seconds peace while I counted down before I had to find them. I counted down from 50, and then I went to look for them. My male cousin, the older sibling, hid in a nearby wardrobe. He was easy to find. His sister, however, proved to be incredibly challenging. I couldn't really be bothered to search for every place in the house, so I thought if I called out to her, I would be able to find her. I walked around the house, asking out loud, "Are you ready?" And because she was little, I didn't really understand the premise of the game, she would enthusiastically answer, "Yes, I am." It sounded like she was hiding under the bed. I bent down as silently as I could and looked under the bed, but there was no one there. Strange. I called out again. "Are you ready?" Then I heard suppressed laughter coming from a wardrobe, a different one to the one I found my cousin in. So I threw the door open with a smile, but then found it empty. At this point, my cousin joined the hunt. She was a good hider, I'll give her that. We couldn't find her. After a few more minutes of searching, I began to get uneasy. I got a little scared, so I called out to her one more time. "I surrender, you win. Can you come out now?" I heard the bathroom door creak open and saw her smiling, victorious face. I just looked in the bathroom, though. It was pretty strange. I asked her outright where she had been hiding after she stopped celebrating her victory over me. "Ah, "That's a secret," she replied. We decided to play a board game after that. All the while, I couldn't get my mind over what had just transpired. It was stuck in my head. Where the hell was she hiding? Later that night, my cousin's father came to pick up his children. Since the hour had grown late, I decided to go to bed myself. While in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about that game of hide and seek. I think I must have dozed off. I heard a voice. You know, like in a dream state, right before you plunge into a deep sleep, you're hovering on the edge of consciousness? It was in that moment when I heard something. When a voice from within my dark bedroom said, "Are you ready?" I jolted awake, like the feeling you have in the dreamlike state when you feel yourself falling. Then I heard it a second time. "Are you ready?" It was very faint, but I heard it. It was there. The voice didn't belong to either of my cousins. It wasn't a young voice. I covered myself from head to toe in my duvet and blankets. The voice sounded old. It sounded adult and female. And I heard it again. It sounded like it was getting closer, and my body started to involuntarily panic. My heart was thumping. "Are you ready?" I couldn't reply like my cousin did. I couldn't say, "Yes, I am." I didn't know what that would entail. I didn't want to know what would happen if I did that. I felt so scared and stressed, and I was still young, so the only logical answer that came to me was, "I'm not ready yet." I heard the old woman's voice whisper, somewhere close to my bed, in a voice as raspy as a mosquito. "Are you ready?" I felt as though I was about to be found in a game of hide and seek that I didn't even enter into. This was the moment. The duvet and blankets were vigorously thrown upwards from my head. I screwed my eyes as tightly shut as I could and let out the loudest scream I've ever heard. I fearfully opened my eyes after a few seconds and saw nothing but my dark and empty bedroom. I have no idea what the hell that was, and I stayed up until my parents got home, absolutely petrified. This took place in the summer of 2022. So every summer in my city, me and my friends like to make small campfires and chill in secluded areas because we don't want to drive an hour to an actual campsite and pay campsite fees and stuff. These also happen pretty spontaneously, so it's a nice last-minute hangout to do. There's this one spot near my house that's located by a river that's really nice because no one really goes there. The only thing to be worried about are bears though, because living in the Pacific Northwest is challenging like that, and my house specifically is located right next to the mountains and forest. But one night in particular, at around 11 p.m, I decide to go ahead of my friends and meet them at the spot and set things up early because I want us to be chilling once they all get there. The spot I get to has a 2-minute paved walkway I have to go through, and then I have to take a small trail ramping down the right side of the bridge that crosses over the river. Along this paved walkway are 2 lamps located at a halfway and another at the start of the bridge/ramp down to the campfire spot. I park my car at the beginning of the trail on the street and bring my campfire stuff like flashlight, lighter, small firewood, small shovel to dig out, and then I get to the spot, and it's a small, sandy beach kind of embankment on the side of the river, with a small wading area for toddlers and their families during the hot summer. So I set up the chair and get to digging the pit with only my flashlight illuminating where I'm digging. I'm also just shoveling the sand right next to me, nowhere near the water, when all of a sudden I hear a loud splash. A splash so loud, it can only come from something equally large like a 2-handed sized rock. I'm confused, because I swear I'm not throwing my sand into the water, even though I'm only a few feet away. I shine my flashlight at the water, and I don't see anything, so I kind of just brush it off, thinking I'm just hearing things. But as I keep shoveling a bit more, I hear another loud splash. At this point I think something is falling from above, because logically something must be falling into the water. I point the flashlight above where some trees are above the river, and I don't see anything big enough to make a splash. So as I keep digging with my heart kind of going at this point, I hear a rustling past the arch of where the bridge goes over. I quickly grab my light and shine it towards where I just heard the rustling, and I call out, "Hello?" to no reply. In my head, if it was a bear, I should be getting out of there immediately, but there was no bear or signs of anything for that matter, so I tell myself I'm just hearing things now because I've seen horror movies and my mind is playing tricks on me. But I hear the noise again, and it clearly sounds like leaves being rustled, so I shine my flashlight over the area again, and as I focus my eyes towards the illuminated area, I see the naked back of a man hunched over. I was kind of frozen in anxiety and stress, because honestly, of all the things I was to see, I didn't think I'd see the naked back of a man. From the quick analysis my brain could muster up, he looked to be in his mid-40s, shaved, not bald, and a medium build, like a mix between chubby and built. As I had my flashlight staying on his back, he started to stand up, and the first thing I noticed was that he wasn't wearing any pants either. My next reflex was to start packing up all the crap and getting the hell out of there, because now I've got it in my head that he's been throwing things in the water to try and scare me away. So after using my reflexive deductive skills, I proceed to speed walk out of there with all of my stuff. I'm carrying all of my things with me as I briskly walk up the small ramp, and I'm on the paved path now out of the forest. I can feel my heart beating in my chest, and I'm frequently looking back to make sure I'm not being followed. I'm in Crocs, mind you, so I'm hoping that if I have to book it out of there, I'd regret not being in sport mode from the get-go. I make it to the halfway point, and a sense of relief starts settling in, knowing that I made it safely out of this very scary situation. But as I check behind me for the final time, I see something. Slowly creeping over the ramp is the naked man crawling on all fours as if he were a primate. His head was positioned towards me, looking at me as he made his way to the middle of the paved walkway. He slowly got up from his stance and started standing on his feet and positioned his body to face me. After setting himself into this new position, the man starts running towards me, and I frickin' book it. I run as fast as I can down the path. My flashlight jumped out of my pocket and I lost it, but I didn't care, because a whole-ass naked man was chasing me at 11 p.m. at night in the secluded forest. I look back for a split second, and the man was still running towards me, still completely naked. He could have my flashlight for all I care. I wanted to make it out of there alive. I finally make it out of the forest and run to my car, which is only 30 feet away from the end of the forest. I desperately get to my car, and like in a classic horror movie, I fumble, trying to get my key fob unlocked. I actually drop my keys and quickly think to myself, I'm actually dead. But I brush the thought off and pick them back up. I get my fob properly and unlock the doors, throwing my things into the back seat before jumping into my car. This felt like an eternity, but in hindsight most likely took no more than 6 seconds. As I tried to guide the key into the ignition, I'm fixated on the end of the paved path that I was just on a few seconds ago, waiting to see if the naked man was still coming. I feel my key go into the ignition, and I switch the sights on the road in front of me, and I zoom out of there as quickly as possible. As I drive away, and I'm a good 30 seconds from the location of the horror that just took place, I get a call from my phone. It was my friends asking me if I made it to the spot yet, and all I say to them is, "Guys, do I have a crazy story to tell you?" They pull up to my house because, again, it was actually decently close to the campfire area, and I tell them the whole story. They all swear that none of them were trying to prank me or anything, and I also knew that none of them would try to full sprint at me with their dong out. But just as we're talking it out in front of my house, there's a college student who looks like he's walking home that's going towards the direction of where I encountered the naked man. I just yelled out to him, "Yo, be careful. There's a naked guy that was chasing me by the bridge that crosses over the river." "Oh really? Damn. Gotta go over that bridge to go home. Good luck, man." The next day I reported it to the police by phone, but they sent over an officer so that I could tell them in person and show them where it happened. When we went to see where I initially saw the man's back hunched over, They said they didn't see any trace of anyone being there previously, but the officers said that they would make a note of it in case it happens again. Some friends says it's a cryptid, others say it's more realistically either a homeless or mentally ill person. I heard this from a friend of mine who used to be in the Japanese Self-Defense Force. It's essentially their army and navy. The reason it's called Defense Force is due to the surrender treaty during World War II. Japan are not allowed to have military as such, but are allowed to have the means to protect themselves, hence the name Self-Defense Force. There is an exercise that they do. I'm not sure if I should be saying this, but I heard it from a friend a while back that might not even be active exercise anymore. Apparently, this exercise stimulates what it would be like to be in the middle of war. The exercise would take place up in the mountains, and it would last for 3 or 4 nights. It sounded pretty intense. They would take turns on guard and sleep in shifts. During that time, there were these kind of bases dug into the mountains. You know, these spaces designed for soldiers to hide in, where they would be able to hide from the elements, keep watch and take breaks. These hides were very well camouflaged. It was very authentic despite being a drill. Well, one day during fall, a training exercise was set up. 2 soldiers in training were stationed outside in the elements to keep watch. However, come the middle of the night, the 2 soldiers in training would abandon their posts. They ran into one of the hides, speaking loudly, and this caught the attention of their supervisor. Their supervisor yelled at them for abandoning their post and demanded an explanation. The soldiers in training could only tell their supervisor that they saw something. They both looked pale and were said to be trembling. The supervisor demanded an answer, and he was told by the pair of them that they had seen a ghost. The other soldiers in the hide listened to the story with great interest, and it went something like this. The 2 guys on guard said that everything was going pretty smoothly. They had heard a rustling sound ahead of them that made them cautious. At first they thought that the noise was being made by an animal, but when they really paid attention to the sound, they realized it was the sound of footfalls. It sounded like someone was walking around. It was several yards away and it was dark, but it wasn't pitch black. There was enough natural light out to make shadows and shapes out. They said they saw a dark silhouette of a human ahead of them, and during the exercise, capturing the other team members was encouraged, so the 2 of them at their post decided to try and sneak up on the owner of the silhouette in an attempt to capture them. They snuck out and split up to approach their target from either side, and held their breaths as they crept up. They closed the distance between them and the silhouette to about 4 yards, and then shouted out at their target. They shouted, "If you make any sudden moves, you will be shot," cocked their guns and aimed at their target. The silhouette just stood there silently without moving, but there was no response. There were no lights in the area, so one of them took out their flashlight while the other kept their gun aimed. The flashlight was pointed at the silhouette and then turned on, only to reveal that no one was there. Whoever had been there was gone. That was what caused the men to leave their posts and come back to hide. Upon hearing this, the supervisor responded with the following: "Dawn is almost here. Face your fear, boys, and return to the post. That's an order." They tried their best to persuade the supervisor to allow them to hide or even transfer them to a different post, but he could not be swayed. A debate turned into a heated argument where threats were exchanged, but eventually the soldiers reluctantly left the hide and returned to their posts, where they were said to be shaking with fear. There have been rumors of people taking their lives in the dormitories of the barracks. Some said that a soldier was once accidentally shot with a live round right there in the training area. So who knows, maybe there might be something substantial to their claims. My friend is convinced that the 2 who abandoned their posts saw an apparition out there in the cold of fall that night. This happened when I was 19. It was when I was in my hometown visiting my parents. My parents live in the city, and it can be a bit of a pain in the ass to park at home sometimes. I often end up parking halfway down the street and walking there. On the night of this experience, I parked down the street and a little around the corner. I visited them, had dinner, caught up, and then said my goodbyes at around 10. So to get back to my car, I had to head down the street and through an alley. My car was parked just at the end of the alley. I got through the alley fine and back to my car. As I was about to go into my car, I noticed something in the alley. It wasn't dark enough for it to be pitch black out, and it was summer, so there was still some faint natural light out at the time. I saw something in the alley which appeared to be the shape of a person. It was heading down the alley towards me and my car. It was almost swaying. It was the strangest thing. Quite eerie, actually. It was twisting and wiggling. Didn't look normal at all. I thought that it was trouble, some kind of weirdo or something trying to distract me, and I decided to get into the car and get the hell out of there. That figure made me feel very uncomfortable. It's so hard to explain, so I just feel like asking a question at this point. Can humans look distorted? It's like he was glitching out, like it was a few frames behind real time. It sort of jiggled to the left and right. It was hard to make out because it was dark, but as soon as my eyes noticed that thing in the alley, it was pretty much unmissable. I strained my eyes and saw it. I saw that thing so clearly. I wish I got out of there sooner than I did, but I was almost hypnotized by the thing. When it reached the end of the alley, it was showered in the light of 2 streetlights. Only then, when it was fully illuminated, was I able to see what the thing was. And to be honest, I still have no clue what I saw that night, but I will try my best to explain it. It was completely pink, sort of skin tone. It looked like meat. That's all I can really describe it as. It was just some amalgamation of meat crudely shaped like a human. And a chill ran down my spine. I was overcome with fear and anxiety after seeing that. Even though I could have easily just as gone back to my parents' house, I decided to drive all the way home. It was like I was repelled. I needed to be so far away from it. I knew that just looking away wasn't enough. It was innate. Some primal voice told me to get the hell away and fast. Something inside me told me that if I went back to my parents, then the thing would follow and get in somehow. I know I sound completely crazy, but that's how I felt. I had to get away, so I did. When I drove off, I looked in my rearview mirror and noticed that the thing from the alley wasn't pursuing me. It didn't make it any less terrifying, though. A few weeks later, I decided to pay my parents another visit. I guess this is because the incident in the alley was still on my mind. I actually decided to mention my experience to my mother, and I was surprised by the response I received from her. "Oh, so you saw that down the alley, right?" "Yeah, that's where I saw it." "It makes sense," she replied. "You've been away for a while, and you haven't heard, but the son of the Ishikawa family got hit by a car and passed away. Head-on collision, hit and run. Sorry to put it in a bad way like this, but maybe that's what you saw. A kind of manifestation of the poor guy." I was shocked, but I guess it kind of made sense. My mum has always said to me that she can see things. I think I got it from her. We often talk about the stuff we've seen. I don't know if my mother's theory is correct, but it's the only thing I have to go on. I've never been a big fan of camping. Around 2012, my friend and I decided to take a Saturday night to camp on private property, on the bank of a small lake in the rural American Southwest. The lake wasn't very large, probably only 50 to 150 yards across, and was more of a deep pond, but it was 5 times as long as it was wide, and from the perspective of our camp, it consumed the majority of our sightline. The plot of land itself wasn't entirely removed from civilization. We were 5 to 10 miles outside of a small suburb of a mid-sized southern city. That being said, it definitely wasn't easy to access, and the only way in was a gated narrow dirt road across a levee which spanned one side of the lake. This road was gated and locked. The owner gave us his code, and we pulled the car through and locked the gate behind us. If you've ever been down south, you know how quickly it gets isolated outside of the cities. Our cities are small, and the rural people around often live rough and wild. We have dense woods, so thick that they're not worth building in unless you have some connection or attachment to the area. I've heard it was not profitable to cut roads through a lot of it when they were building the highways in the 50s, so not much development has happened in the last 100 years, and in some places since the Civil War. It's not uncommon to go for a 30-minute drive straight out of town and come upon cabins that are obviously off the grid. My friend and I were used to living in the suburbs, so we were just happy to see the stars and hear the sounds of nature. We were at our very utilitarian camp, small Coleman 2-person tent and blanket, simply looking around and enjoying the night, when suddenly my buddy sat straight. "Hey, do you see that guy over there?" He pointed to the other side of the small lake. I didn't see anything. I sat up slightly and said, "Nah, it's just the dark playing tricks on you." He seemed very shaken. "Nah, look, there are a bunch of faces behind the trees now." That got my attention, and so I sat up fully, rubbing my eyes trying to gain full focus. And then I saw them. Small, round, white faces stared back at me from across the lake. Perhaps 15 to 20 of them, all positioned in such a way that their bodies were behind the trees and only their heads were visible. The best way I can describe the faces is like very pale, somehow internally illuminated children, it would seem. I should mention that neither of us were drinking or high. We were too young for that, not for at least a few more years. We'd had dinner at home, and were just planning on going to sleep and chilling out for a while. The faces weren't moving. I was kind of sitting there in shock, thinking that my eyes would adjust, and I would see that they were a reflection, bugs or owls or something. But I would never come to that realization. I stared right back at them for what felt like 5 minutes, looked back at my friend, and they were gone. Bodies of water carry sound extremely well, and we heard excessive shuffling from the other side of the lake, and a few small branches snap. It's incredible what your ears pick up during an otherwise silent night. My buddy was tearing up when he said, "What the hell are those?" And I didn't have a good answer. Neither of us slept particularly well. I definitely felt validated in my feelings of disliking camping, but what were we going to do? I tried to do some research on the internet, but I never found a plausible phenomena that would explain that. If anyone else can, I'd love to hear it. My dad is a truck driver, and around 20 years ago, while resting at the side of the road, he woke up in the morning seeing that his entire trailer was robbed empty. My dad's a heavy sleeper, but his cargo could not have been stolen with at least a forklift, and everyone would have woken up by a forklift unloading a trailer. My dad suspected the robbers used a pump to get some kind of chloroform into his cabin to make sure he couldn't wake up, and my mum went crazy when they heard this story, for good reason. What if they used too much gas or whatever? Or my dad, who's ex-military, had woken up and tried to play the hero. It could have gone wrong in a lot of ways. The police, who were informed at first, thought my dad was in on it, and we can assure you that almost no cargo transported by an ordinary truck driver without security is worth police investigation. Having the police go through your entire house and belongings is something you don't wish on your worst enemy, in my opinion. It's humiliating, and the entire neighborhood sees you as a criminal. On top of that, you have to work 6-day weeks, and every free day is taken up with the ongoing investigation. It was definitely not a good time to be a deep sleeper. Myself and 2 friends had to drive from Laredo, Texas to Baton Rouge one night in my Ford van. It was around 2 a.m. There's a particularly long and dark section of the highway just outside Laredo, no buildings, towns or lights, for about 50 miles. I was in the right lane coming up to a truck and pulled out into the left passing lane. As I was slowly overtaking this long truck, my peripheral vision caught a sudden movement of this big truck towards the right shoulder. I saw the truck was swerving to avoid hitting a person dressed in all white. White face, whose arms were folded across the chest and eyes were closed as they walked across the highway. I swerved to the left and barely missed this ghostly-looking person with my passenger mirror, and I can still remember seeing the eyes were closed. That's how close we came to this person. I'm not sure if they were real or not, but I know that the other person saw them too. I just drove on. A news that happened in my city a few years ago was about a woman who had been quite depressed and saw a semi parked on an off-ramp and decided that to take her own life, she would lay underneath one of the tires and just wait for him to drive off. No one really knows for sure how long she'd been laying there until someone found what was left of her. But the thought that the trucker probably never knew that he aided in someone taking their life is a really horrible thought. My grandfather was in the Air Force, and one night when he was driving a truck back to base, he saw a woman standing on the side of the road in a long white dress at around 2 a.m. He circled back to ask if she needed help, but by the time he got there was no one to be found. He searched for her as well for about an hour before giving up and decided to leave it alone. When he went on his way, he had a strong feeling that he needed to switch lanes, as he was on the road alone in the middle of nowhere at night and had no idea why. And just ahead of the road was a broken down truck with no hazards on that he would have hit and probably killed by if he'd have stayed on the lane he had been in. To this day, he's convinced that that woman was there to give him a warning. I used to drive I-80 between San Francisco and Cheyenne, Wyoming, a lot. It's about 16 to 20 hours of driving depending on weather and traffic. Anyway, one time I got out at a rest stop to stretch my legs and take a leak, and maybe buy a Coke. I go to the bathroom and there are 3 beefy bearded dudes all naked from the waist down, just laying on the ground in a daisy chain. I looked at them and 2 of them looked at me. I just said, sorry, and walked right back out. Oddly, all I could think of was, wow, that floor is probably filthy. A second time I was driving at night, and the car starts making odd grinding noises, like I ran over something that got stuck. It's about 2 a.m. and I pull into a rest stop. It's well lit, and I wake up my buddy who was sleeping. I explain it to him as we get out of the car, and we both hear what sounds like kids crying. There are no other cars at the rest stop, but we frequently heard stories about children trafficking and kidnapping nearby, so we decided to check it out. We grab our flashlights and head towards the noise, which is coming from the bathrooms. As we get closer, we realize it's coming from the women's bathroom, and it's a low, dull sobbing. We're prepared for the worst, and walk in, expecting to see someone brutally beaten. But what we see is nothing. The sound is there, and still clearly coming from the room, but the room is empty. We turn on the lights, still nothing. Check each stall, the trash can, nothing. Even start looking for where the hell it's coming from. Nothing. Is it a hidden speaker? Are we on candid camera? What the hell's going on? My buddy climbs up one of the stalls to get to the top window in the rest stop, which is vented out and open. He closes it, and the noise stops completely. Opens it and there's no more noise. We sit there for a few seconds staring at each other, and he shrugs. Then the window slams shut again without him touching it. We were out of that restroom in seconds. The noise starts up about 10 seconds later as we get to the car, and we're tearing out of the parking lot within 10 more seconds. The grinding noise is still there, so this time I pull over a few miles later at a Flying J truck stop, well lit, sometimes occupied. There are a few truckers there, no other civilians. We check under the vehicle, and there's a red and silver piece of metal wedged between that part of the vehicle and the road, about half an inch or so off the ground. So, with us within the vehicle, it must have been grinding against the ground. We can't remove it by hand, it's really wedged in there. So we kick at it to bend it and figure we'll remove it when we get back. A week later I had my mechanic take it out while he was doing a servicing. Turns out it was part of a kid's tricycle, the red area where someone could stand. I don't know why, and I don't think they were connected or anything, but for those moments, it totally messed me up. This happened when I was in the 4th year of elementary school. I joined a local youth volunteer group. Just to give you some background on what that entailed, it was a program led by university students. Basically, we would volunteer to clean up litter, do some gardening, stuff like that to help out the community. It wasn't all work though. We got some really great camping trips because of our efforts, and I enjoyed it. This experience took place during that year's summer vacation. We were set to be camping out by an abandoned forestry school deep out in the mountains. I don't remember all that well since I was really young at the time, so some details are going to be either missing or a little sparse. There was a river that flowed near the abandoned school, and we, the elementary students, were having a lot of fun playing and swimming in it. The river flowed upstream, and there were lots of large rocks and stones on the riverbed. Some were just jutting out of the water too. Although the current was pretty strong, we were still able to swim there. We didn't really care about distance swimming. We were just paddling around and having a great time. The water was pretty deep, so some of us were looking for a place to dive in. I also realized at that point it would be possible to swim under a little bridge they had over the river. I don't know if we were supposed to be allowed to do all that, but we did. The university students didn't stop us. I doubt that kind of thing would be allowed nowadays though. My neighbor joined our camping trip, Ada. Ada wasn't the quickest learner. That was about as gently as I can put it. Because she was a bit slow, she was bullied by other students. When I was diving in the river, I saw that Ada was struggling to keep her head above the water level. I dove in, and I was underwater thinking she looks like she's struggling because she probably hasn't swam much before. Classic Ada. I might have thought something a bit meaner, but that's neither here nor there. When I came up, I noticed that she really was struggling, and it looked like she was on the verge of drowning. I yelled to my campmates on the shore for help, but none of them were reacting quickly enough. While I was about to yell louder, I felt something clasp against my leg. Ada, who was drowning, had grabbed hold of my leg and was pulling me down with her. She was a lot stronger than I thought she would be. I guess fear for one's life can bring out sudden hidden strength to the individual. I was desperately trying to get to the surface, and Ada's hand tightened its grip around my ankle. I even felt her long hair getting tangled around my leg between my toes. It was gross. I felt so breathless. I felt as though I was going to die. I was completely in panic mode. I had no time to think of her. It didn't even enter my mind. I could only think of my own survival. Although I knew it would be painful to decide to open my eyes and look down, I wasn't ready for what I saw. I didn't see an elementary school student grabbing hold of my ankle. I saw a bone-white pale woman grabbing onto me. Her dark hair swayed in the water like seaweed. I remember thinking that very clearly because I thought straight after that I wasn't in the sea, I was in the river. That was just a mad thought. I could see her other pale hand reach out and attempt to grab my other ankle. If this woman got a hold of my other ankle, I knew I would be done for. A lot happened in the space of a few seconds, but the thought that jumped to my forefront was, that's not Ada. I felt a fear I haven't had the displeasure of feeling again. A feeling of pure disgusting fear. A fear so terrible it was almost incomprehensible. Fight or flight. I kicked the woman as hard as I could with my bare foot. Eventually I felt her grip loosen, and I used the last of my strength to dart to the surface and scramble to the shore. When I emerged from the river, everyone was looking at me. I saw Ada, and when I stopped spluttering and caught my breath, I yelled at her, "Weren't you drowning just now?" She didn't say anything, but all the other students almost in unison told me that I was the only one drowning. No one else was anywhere near me. If I hadn't kicked that pale woman so hard when I did, I might have not made it out of the river. When I think about how close I was to being dragged down to the depths by that woman, it still sends a shiver down my spine. I'm not sure who she was, but I believe her to be otherworldly. I think she was some kind of spirit yokai or cryptid that preys on the victims in the river. Perhaps she was a victim herself. It was one camping experience I don't think I'll ever forget. I don't really believe in the paranormal, but I do have a story to share. I'll let you make your own mind of it. One afternoon I was home alone. My wife was out running errands. I spent a lot of time home alone, so it wasn't unusual in any way. I was sitting up in my room on my computer, as I often was, scrolling through social media or watching videos, when I heard my wife come in through the front door. It sounded like she was carrying some plastic grocery bags from shopping. This was a pretty common occurrence as she loves making excuses to get out the house, and I'm more of a homebody. I got the notification on my phone that the kitchen had sensed movement. The doorway in the kitchen leads out to our entry hallway, so you can see people pass by the kitchen door as they cross the hall. Then the living room camera alerted shortly after. Again, nothing unusual. We have kids, so we set the cameras up in the family areas to keep an eye on them when they play video games and such. They come in handy when the kids get into arguments or try lying to us. They also allow us to speak to them if we run errands and leave them home alone as they're older. So after taking notes of the alerts, I kept scrolling away, awaiting my wife to come upstairs to the bedroom. But 20 minutes pass, and she hadn't come up, and the motion alerts had stopped. The feeling you get when someone is in your house, well, that feeling was gone. I listened closely but couldn't hear anything. "Babe?" I called towards the stairs but received no reply. I got off the bed and started down the steps, calling for her as I went, but there was no reply. I checked all the rooms and was puzzled that she wasn't there. I knew for certain that I had heard her and definitely felt her presence in the house. I stepped outside to see if she had run back to the car for something, but her car wasn't there. Now I was really puzzled, but I eventually arrived at the conclusion that she had forgotten something and had run back to town. I thought it was strange that she didn't come up and say anything, but maybe she had thought I was napping. I made my way back up the stairs and decided I would give her a call. I called her cell phone, and when she picked up, I asked her where she'd gone. She said she was still out running errands. "So why didn't you come up and see me when you stopped a minute ago?" I asked. "What do you mean? I've been gone for a few hours." "What?" I reply. "You were down there for like 10 minutes. I heard you come in and carry bags. There was a motion alert and everything. I swore it was you. Who the hell would have come in?" There was a pause as we both considered this. She started to get worried and said that I should check the cameras. I agreed and told her I'd call her back shortly. Now my heart was pounding a little, but who the hell came into my home and why did they walk in then leave? Had they taken anything? Was this the first time? Were my children safe here? Nervously, I pulled up our motion cameras on my phone and started to scroll through the kitchen footage just before I'd walked down the steps. I pressed play on the recording and waited. I then heard a slam, a few knocking sounds like someone was really coming inside, then the grocery bag noise started. Now my heart was really pounding. Someone had definitely come inside and I was about to watch them stroll through my home. As I leaned in closer to the screen, a dark shadow suddenly loomed into view and crossed my entry hallway past the kitchen. I could make it out plain as day. As it passed, I was in complete disbelief. What the hell was that? The camera was slightly distorted from it. It didn't really have a shape that was recognizable. It was just a shadowy, shapeless cloud. I switched to the living room camera and played it again. Same noise, only this time I watched in full view as the shadow came from the hallway into the center of the living room. Then the entire room went dim on the camera. This was mid-afternoon. Were the cameras messing up? No. I had heard and felt something was in my home. I have been here 10 years and never been wrong. What was this? The scariest part? Just as I came down the stairs, on the recording, everything goes bright. It lit up again like normal. It was like a sunny day when a dark cloud rolls over and your whole room goes dim. Only there was not a cloud in the sky that day. I've never been more terrified in my life, as I was sitting in the house alone, watching the footage of me walking down the stairs towards whatever the hell it was that I saw. I watched it over and over in disbelief. I knew I heard someone walk in my house. I felt them. There was no question in my mind that my wife had come home. Only she had not. It was just noises and a strange shadow. I have never once been too afraid of doors moving, strange noises, or thought someone was in my home when there was no one there. I've always just been able to tell when someone comes into my home from the familiar sounds and feeling. In fact, it never happened since. I called my mum and I was so freaked out. I explained what happened and showed the footage. She shrugged it off, as did my wife. In hindsight, I guess it wasn't really much to see. Some noises and a strange shadow. Easily explained away with logic when you didn't have the feeling of knowing someone was there to accompany it. But to me, it was the most terrifying experience and closest encounter I've had to anything supernatural. I don't believe in ghosts, I never really have, but I know something or someone was in my house that day. I wanted to share the experience I had back in the spring of 2018. I'm an avid outdoorsman and love to hunt and camp around the Francis Marion and Sumter National Forest. Back in 2018, I took my young son and dog out to a remote area in the National Forest to test out a new camper shell on my recently purchased truck. We found a secluded area off a dirt road, made dinner, and then packed it in for the night as soon as it got dark. It was around 11 p.m. at night. I sat up and looked out of the back of the truck due to my dog growling. In the distance, I saw what appeared to be hundreds of small white balls of light darting around, then hovering for a few seconds and slowly converging to our campsite. They looked just like the dust orbs you see on videos, but these were producing light in a completely dark forest. They surrounded my truck. It seemed like there were hundreds of them. They were a soft white light, and they didn't blink. Lightning bugs were out in the early evening, but those were yellow and blinking. And after around half hour of them floating around and concentrating around us, I finally worked up the nerve to open the truck, lit a lantern, and they promptly disappeared. After turning off the lights and locking back up, they returned. My son was fast asleep, thank goodness, and I watched them until I finally fell asleep at around 1 a.m. The next morning when we tried to leave, the battery on my new truck was dead. There weren't any lights in the back cab where we would have used any power, and a week later I had to replace the electric control module. Not sure if it's relevant, but I thought I'd add it in anyway. I just wanted to know if anyone has had a similar experience to mine, because I'm left very confused, and I just wish I knew what they were. Many years ago, when I was a trucker, I had something very frightening happen to me. I was driving this particularly long and desolate stretch of highway. The roads were completely straight and the land completely flat. It was an incredibly boring drive with not much to see but forest on either side. Suddenly, up ahead, in the darkness, I see what appears to be a shape forming in the road. I squint to see if I could see it any clearer, and it appears to be a baby's pram. I just about swerved lanes in time to avoid it and managed to get my truck to a complete stop, when suddenly a thought crosses my mind. An old colleague of mine once shared a story that people out in the middle of nowhere will put odd things out in the road for you to either hit them or stop and check what they are. And when you do stop and leave your cab, they will rush you, do who knows what to you, maybe harm, kill, or leave you there and steal your truck and all its contents. That thought flashed before my eyes in that moment, and I made the split decision to start my truck again and keep going. Just as I'm starting to roll away, I look in the rearview mirror and I notice a few people start to leave the woods and just stare at me. I put my foot to the floor, and I'm glad to still be here. Who knows what would have happened if I'd have left my cab that day. My dad used to be a truck driver in the UK. I remember that he would have to be at the Dover docks really early to start getting the loads to where they needed to go. I don't remember what his destination was, just that he had a really long drive ahead of him. Anyway, he tells me the story. One day he's picked up a load. It's still horribly early, and he has a very long drive ahead of him. He has to drive through some pretty isolated parts of the country to get to where he needs to go on this particular trip, and it's one he didn't do very often. There's part of the journey towards the end that requires the use of country lanes, something I don't think you'd need to do nowadays, but I digress. He's driving along the middle of nowhere in the dead of morning. There's absolutely no one out, not a soul, when suddenly, far up ahead, he sees something. It appears to be a person limping at the side of the road. Now, as you probably know, trucks take a notoriously longer amount of time than cars to slow down because of the weight of the cargo they carry. My dad, wondering who would be limping and if this person needs help, starts to slow his vehicle down. As he does so, he looks out of the passenger window, rolls it down, and asks the person if they need a hand. The guy just ignores him and just carries on limping. My dad puts the truck into a complete stop, jumps out, and goes over to talk to the man. When he's just about to reach the man, he goes to ask him if he's okay, and before his very eyes, the man disappears into thin air, as if his body were less substantial than smoke. Within an instant, he's gone, and my dad just about loses his mind. Whenever he shares this story, he tries to impress upon me the amount of fear he had in that moment, because not only did he see the man when he was far away, he saw him close up, and then saw him turn to nothing. He didn't know how to express that, and made it to the depot shivered, told his boss that he was feeling incredibly unwell, and came straight home. He didn't go back to work for a week. He was that shaken up. I don't know what it was he saw that day, and neither does he, as he's never really one to believe in the paranormal. But it's the closest he's ever come to believing in something, and he's sure it must have been the soul of someone who departed this world long ago, maybe injured on that same road. It often leaves me wondering. This story happened to my dad in the early 70s. He was a long-haul truck driver. I don't remember where he started from, but I do know that he was going to end up in Denver, Colorado, which is where we lived at the time. So, my dad was driving. It was a long stretch of road when he came upon a traffic jam. There had been a pretty messed up accident, and traffic was backed up for miles. He was going to be there a while, so he turned off the engine and just waited patiently, turned on the radio and began to chill. That's when he gets a knock on the side of his window. He looks down and sees this skinny kid no older than about 20, who's begging and pleading with him to take him. He really needed a ride. He asked my dad in which direction he was going, and he told him he was going to Denver, and the kid said that would be amazing. My dad never said yes, but the kid kind of saw it as an invitation. So the kid goes round and starts opening the side door. For a few moments, my dad debates whether he should lock the door and tell the kid to get lost, or just let him in and be a good Samaritan. Well, like I said, this was still in the days of hitchhiking, and he thinks what the heck. He could use the company. It's going to be a few hours till he gets there, and it'll keep him awake at any rate. So the kid jumps in and they start talking. He seems nice enough and talk about a variety of things, and just after the conversation comes to a lull, does the traffic start moving again, and my dad starts picking up speed. The kid at this point, who had been a complete chatterbox for the last hour and a half, suddenly starts going all quiet. My dad isn't too fussed, and because of the lull in conversation, puts the radio back on and just listens to it while they drive. After about 45 minutes of silence, the kid speaks up, saying he really needs to use the toilet. My dad knows for a fact that there aren't any truck stops in the near future for at least another half hour, and asks the kid if he can wait. The kid is pretty insistent that if he doesn't go now, he'll probably end up doing it in the truck, which my dad is very much against. So he finds the nearest shoulder and pulls off and lets the kid go out into the middle of nowhere to do his business. The kid had been gone at this point for well over 5 minutes, and my dad's starting to get a bit irritated. It's pitch black in the middle of the night, the only lights being that of the truck and the occasional passing vehicle, and the kid has just gone. He starts to worry and wonders if the kid has maybe fallen or something. So he decides to give it a few more minutes before he grabs his flashlight and goes out to investigate. He climbs down from his truck and just feels that something is off. He can't quite put his finger on it. So before he goes out, he goes back in, reaches for his handgun, and slides it into the back of his belt. He walks around slowly and quietly, hoping he'll just hear the kid saying he's done or whatever, or see his footsteps towards the truck. But no such thing. It's getting really weird at this point. My dad's feeling super uncomfortable, and half thinking that maybe he should just leave the kid and hope he can hitchhike with someone else. But he really doesn't want to be that guy, knowing he would leave this kid stranded at night in the middle of nowhere. He looks around the grass and can't see him. He puts his flashlight towards the tree line and can't really see him either, although the foliage is extensive, and he definitely isn't anywhere near the hard shoulder. He wonders if he should go out into the forest to look for him, when suddenly he hears running footsteps from behind him, and someone smash into him and poke a metal blade into the back of his neck. It's the kid. His voice no longer sweet, innocent, and needy. Now it was cold and malicious. "Open the trailer, dude, or I'm gonna have to kill you here and now." My dad was completely taken by surprise and tells the kid calmly that he's gonna go get the key, as it's locked. The kid has his knife to his side and tells him to walk slowly. My dad obviously has to climb into the truck, and just as he's getting up, he says he's looking for the key, with the kid waiting at the bottom. He looks around frantically when he sees a magnet that he had picked up ages ago. He throws it to the ground outside, and it makes a metal clatter. The kid instinctively looks down, and in that one moment does he slam the door shut and drive away, making sure he locks the passenger door right after locking his own. The kid starts screaming and thrusting the knife at the truck, but it's no use. My dad drives off quickly, and the kid retreats, abandoned in the middle of nowhere. My dad felt a mix of relief and fear, because he really hoped no one else would pick up the kid, and wondered if he'd get in trouble for leaving someone dangerous on the side of the road. He tried reporting it to the police, but by the time they even went out there, he was long gone, and he never had any follow-up. But he often wonders what happened to the kid who would have killed him out in the middle of nowhere. This happened about 20 years ago, but I think about it every now and then. When it happened all those years ago, I was a schoolboy. I had just gotten a camera for my birthday, and I was really into photography. One summer's afternoon, I decided to take myself on a little hike into the mountains. I rode about an hour on my bike to a really remote location. I brought along some food, a couple of rice balls, and some sausage thing. Yeah, I still remember that. Riding up towards the mountain, I saw many fields, and there were old people working those fields. I felt as if I could leave my bike anywhere and not run the risk of it being stolen. I was happy that I'd chosen to come out here. So I left my bike in a shady area and began heading into the woods. I walked for a short while, and then I saw a dog up ahead. The dog had a thick chain around its neck. The dog wasn't looking at me, so I whistled and the dog stopped. When the dog looked at me, I noticed that it looked a lot like my dog which died a few years ago. It was a mixed breed dog, and I called out to it, "Hey buddy, what are you doing out here with this big old chain around your neck?" I removed the chain from his neck and split my lunch with the dog, who looked super hungry. I thought after we ate we could go our separate ways, but the dog followed me. I turned to the dog and said, "Hey buddy, sorry but that's all the food I have, there's nothing left." The dog just stared at me, and I couldn't help but smile and laugh. The dog just sat there panting and wagging his tail. I patted him on the head and turned to leave, but once again the dog followed. I thought to myself, you know what, maybe this isn't so bad. It could be fun to have a little company. "You coming with me then, boy?" I asked the dog, and its tail began to wag. The answer was clearly yes. So I headed into the mountain with a dog at my heels. The mountains weren't very big. I thought that I would take about 2 hours in total for this trip. I was climbing the mountain, taking photos of the plants and the views. It was great. It was the height of summer, and the cicadas were in full voice. There were numerous insects buzzing and chirping, the birds singing in the trees. I passed a pair of old men, who also were out for a hike. I greeted one, and they said something like, "Oh, you're with a dog, huh?" This happened when I was about 70% into the hike. I had climbed this mountain several times before. I felt I knew the area quite well. I loved it there. I came across a dirt road that I hadn't seen before when I was near the bottom of the mountain. Beyond the dirt road, there was gravel that extended around the left. I couldn't see where it went without walking down it. I wondered, what's down here? I couldn't believe I hadn't seen this place before. I walked down the dirt road closer to the gravel. There was a rusted wire suspended between two white pillars, which acted as a kind of barrier. I could see a dilapidated cabin back there. It looked like it had been abandoned. Whoa, what a great place to photograph, I thought to myself. I slipped under the rusted wire and onto the gravel path, but stopped when I heard the dog barking like mad behind me. It surprised me so much I turned to face the dog. The dog had its haunches up and was kind of in a defensive position. You know, the one that dogs do when they bark, yeah? The look on the dog's face is one I will never forget. The primal expression of fear and distress. Something had spooked the dog into a fight or flight situation. I should make it clear that the dog wasn't barking at me. It wasn't scared. The dog wasn't going to lunge at me or anything. It was barking at something behind me, barking at the road which I was about to embark down. My back went cold. I noticed something. I couldn't hear the sounds of the cicadas or sounds down the road. I stared down there and felt a cold wind blowing at my back. This is somewhere I shouldn't go, I thought. I hurried back to the mountain path I knew, and the sounds of nature grew louder. I looked around for my companion, but couldn't find the dog anywhere. He had disappeared. I looked for the dog while I went down the mountain. I wanted to say goodbye, maybe even thank you, because I'm certain that if it wasn't for the dog, my curiosity would have got the better of me, and I would have walked off beyond the wire barrier. I wonder what would have happened to me if I did that. Did the dog save me from something? I think it did. I must have looked around the mountain for about an hour and a half trying to find the dog, but it was gone. I was tired and hungry and ready to head home at that point. I said goodbye to the dog out loud, went back a few times to the mountain area, but never found the gravel path or the dog again. I worked in Disneyland a while back, at the stores in California Adventure, after Buena Vista Street opened. One night I was cleaning the shelves in Trolley Treats when the locked automatic doors just opened. Now I normally wouldn't think of anything at all, but two fellow cast members behind me checking out registers just stopped and stared. I asked, "Did those just open on their own?" They both nodded. I shrugged and continued my work, and 10 minutes later it did it again, but this time I was alone. I got down and checked the door, but it wouldn't even open for me, so no idea what caused it that time. I mentioned this event to a lead who told me that the whole Trolley Treat side and the old Burbank ice cream shop were haunted by a little girl who died in the parking lot back when DCA wasn't even a dream. She apparently likes messing with the boys and would tease male leads closing up by running up and down the aisles late at night. My parents are working from home, and I just quit my full-time job because I start school full-time in the next few weeks. I woke up at around 10:30 this morning and got up to check what my parents were up to. As this was during COVID time, they were both working from home. My father was out, but my mother was working in the table we have in the dining room, so I sat on the chair across from her and spoke to her for a bit. I was just starting to scroll through my TikToks when all of a sudden everything around my phone was covered in what appeared to be a giant white light. Not someone flashing headlights at our house, and even if they did, the sun is shining so bright it wouldn't make that much of a difference. I immediately looked up at my mum, and we were both giving each other this "what the actual hell" look, and soon after, we were saying it. This was very bright. Not a flash or anything a phone could make. It looked to have immense energy behind it, almost like a concentrated lightning strike in the room. I have no idea what happened, and the internet isn't giving me any answers, other than my eyes have something wrong, which I know is fake, since both my mum and I saw the same thing. I'd love to hear if anyone has any explanations for this bizarre paranormal phenomena we both witnessed. I was a ride operator at a local theme park, and one night while closing up a ride, one of my co-workers went down to shut the door to the queue. I saw there was a kid with a hat and striped shirt through the security cameras running through the line. I called my co-worker over the loudspeaker to let him know that there was one kid left in the queue. He searched all over and didn't spot anyone. There was a point on the security camera that my co-worker was directly near the kid, but he said he didn't see anyone, and eventually the kid never popped up on the camera again, and there was no sign of him leaving. And thankfully it happened to be my last week working there. Years ago in Norway, I was enjoying a camping trip to celebrate one of my friend's birthday, and we had planned to hide the gifts in a small hedge maze close to where we were camping to make opening them more fun. Therefore, the night before, we all went to bed, at which point it was basically pitch black apart from the weak light emitted from the moon. I volunteered to go hide the gifts, and since it was so close by, the adults allowed me to hide them. The maze in question was in the middle of a clearing, and wasn't that big, being circular and maybe 20 meters across, so it didn't take me long to hide the gifts. When I was coming out though, I made the mistake of looking into the edge of the heavily wooded forest and noticed an odd shape. It seemed to move a lot more than its surroundings. It was somewhat windy that night, so the plants were moving slightly, and seemed humanoid in shape. After what was probably only a few seconds, the shape abruptly moved, making it seem like the figure was suddenly facing me. The thing is that whatever the shape was didn't have a face. Where it would have been, it was simply flat. It's hard to describe just how terrified I was in that moment. Not only was I only 11, but I was alone in the dark, maybe 5 minutes away from the rest of the campers. If I had to describe it, I would say that it was as if freezing water was suddenly poured all over my entire body. My heart felt like it had stopped, and needless to say, I bolted the hell out of there, ran all the way back to the rest, and proceeded to explain what I had seen. Obviously, none of the adults believed me, but my friend and some other kids did. Not really surprising, since my friend group at the time was really into haunted stories and such. The next morning I went back to the same place and explored the forest around it with a bunch of other kids, but didn't really see anything out of place. Although I did find an albeit small spot where the grass looked like it had been squished, as if someone or something had been standing there, and it was around the place I saw the shape. Thinking about it in hindsight, what I saw that night was most likely a plant moving in the wind, but even years later I can clearly remember the jerky movement of the creature turning to look at me, only to be faced with a completely featureless face. It probably sounds stupid, but trust me when I say it's a terrifying thing to be able to remember. I love mountains. I love going on mountain hikes and trail walks. I used to go with some friends in a group or even by myself. This experience takes place when I went to a certain mountain for the first time. The day I wanted to climb this summit of the breezy mountain, the conditions were great. It was late summer, and the weather was clear and breezy. I had read in a guidebook that there was a temple at the top of the mountain. It had been there for many years apparently, and I thought it would be cool to check it out while I was there. In years gone by, there was a chief priest, and was subject to visits from people all over, but according to the guidebook, in modern days it had fallen into a state of disrepair, perhaps due to the lack of visitors. There used to be a small village in the mountain too, but apparently it was destroyed by a tsunami, which is why the temple was built, to honor those lost villagers, and that there was a memorial up there. When I climb mountain trails, I always keep my eyes open and make sure I am aware of my surroundings. When I was about halfway up that mountain, I did notice a few stone structures which looked like they could have been part of homes. Seeing those destroyed stone walls and the abandoned buildings made me feel a little unpleasant. Those poor people. I managed to make it to the summit quite easily, and there was plenty of natural light left in the day, so I was able to see the temple. It looked abandoned, and thankfully no one had tried to destroy or ruin it, and I was glad it was still intact. The roads leading up to it had grown over a little, but it wasn't that bad. I weaved my way through the weeds and bush along the road. I just wanted to see where it led. About halfway along the road, I noticed that some of the road had been lost due to a landslide. It certainly looked like it was no longer in use. I felt a little sense of unease when I got to that part of the road. I couldn't place the source of my unease, so I tried to ignore it and push on. I struggled through a particularly thick portion of brush, and after climbing a little, I spotted something up ahead in the road. There was a mini-truck. The mini-truck was parked off the side of the road at an angle, as if it was halfway through a U-turn. It had driven up onto the side of a grassy verge. It looked very out of place, especially since I had just spent the morning looking at abandoned buildings and going through the woods. The closer I got to the car, the more I realized there was something wrong with it. I got close enough to see the door wasn't locked. I took note of the license plate. The car itself looked relatively new. There was also some rope in the back of the truck. It didn't look like the truck had been moved for a while. There were no fresh tire marks to indicate a crash, and the grass verge had grown beneath the front two wheels. The truck looked abandoned. But who would abandon a perfectly good truck? Nothing about that was adding up. Nothing until I thought of the possibility of foul play. I was growing more concerned by each passing moment, so I decided enough was enough and it was time to call the police. I didn't have great signal in the mountains and I didn't want to stay there anymore, so I thought that I would call the cops from home. When I got on the phone to the police, I told them the license plate number of the truck and about what I witnessed. It was pretty standard stuff. I made a report and hung up. I thought about it for a while. Maybe I should have stayed longer, or maybe I should have tried to call out to someone. But there was just something so off about being near that van in the desolate location. I just had to leave. About a week later, I received a call from the police that were following up on the truck incident. They wanted to tell me that they had found something. I remember during our call, the police officer paused and said to me in a very sober voice, "Before I proceed, I have to ask if you knew what happened to the owner of the car." That really threw me. I was curious. Well, maybe I should say I was curious, but when I asked myself if I wanted to know what happened, I found the answer was no. So I told the officer that I didn't want to know and hung up. Sorry, but if this ever happens to you, you'll probably understand. There was an atmosphere to that car. There was something wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't bear the thought of being told that the owner of the car took their life in those woods. Therefore, the mountains that were enshrined in a very sad history became a little sadder to me in the world. It also became a mountain that I will no longer return to. Maybe misery and despair are all just a part of it, and we have to recognize that. But I didn't need to know, and I'm glad of it. My buddies and I went fish camping at a pretty remote lake off a 4x4 trail about 2 hours from home. There were 4 of us, all men, with me being the smallest at 195 pounds. The camping spot has great fishing, as it has a nice, deep spot with lots of trout right next to it, but the campground itself is rough. It's on the side of a steep hill with barely enough room for tents and a small fire ring. It's accessible by a rough, steep-winding 100-yard trail from where you park your 4x4 above the camp. We had a great day drinking beers, catching our limits on nice-sized trout, and after it got dark we made a small fire and just chatted the night away. It was a great time. Suddenly there was someone shining a blinding light in our eyes from about 10 yards away. At no point did we hear this person approach. The person announced themselves as the sheriff. One of the friends asked, "Oh, are you a Colo County sheriff?" The stranger didn't respond to the question. Instead, he shined a light in each of our faces, then said, "Have a good night," then walked off. We sat there dumbfounded, asking each other what the hell that was. And after a minute or two, curiosity eventually got the better of us. So, I lit up this person with my stupidly powerful flashlight. He was about 50 yards away, right before the crest of a bend of the trail, right before he was out of sight. We all saw it. He was just some dude, in a flannel shirt and jeans. "That's not a sheriff." He must have heard me, as you could see him start moving quickly for a second before he was out of sight. A moment later we heard an engine start, and that was strange. We didn't hear the vehicle earlier, but I attribute that to being drunk and loud. Now what makes this kind of scary to us is what if it wasn't 4 big dudes he approached? What if it was a single person or a couple? What were his intentions? Should we have chased after him? Debatable. Should we have reported this to the actual sheriff's department? Absolutely. But regrettably, we never did. I went hiking in the mountains when I was a student. I'm much older now, but this experience has stayed with me, so I felt like this was the perfect place to share it. I had a really strange experience in the mountains during the autumn. I had joined a hiking society in college when I was a fresher, and I joined with about 10 other students from other universities. I went to an all-women university, and the club I joined was all male. They had traversed the mountains many times in the past. Some of them had a ton of experience that I did not. I thought that it would be great to make some friends and learn from these guys. I felt as if I could rely on them in a sense. We all picked a great day to begin our hike. The weather was perfect, the place wasn't too bad either, and I expected to get left in their dust, but I was keeping up with them quite well. I was tired, sure, but keeping pace. We hiked for a few hours, and then we got to the mountain. We had plans to make our campsite and climb the mountain before the sun went down. We took a super short breather, and then we started lunch. It was nice because we all pitched in, and before long our hungry bellies were full. I think everyone was happy with the pace of things and the distraction of dinner, so we kind of wandered off task and were a bit behind schedule. We got back on task after lunch and got ready to climb the mountain, so we split into two groups. I was in the second group and wasn't upset about that. I didn't want to be leading the climb. We planned on reaching the summit by 3 p.m. We were supposed to have a break at the summit for half hour, but pretty much as soon as we started climbing, a thick layer of fog began to descend, so we quit taking a break due to the low visibility brought on by the fog. The visibility got worse and worse. Before long, the sun was hidden behind clouds and mist. It was making every step back to the base more difficult, and after about an hour and a half it was 4:45 p.m. and impossible to walk without the aid of a flashlight. The problem for us was, experienced though I thought my new friends were, they didn't pack any flashlights and neither did I. When we got to the summit, they still insisted on leaving early, but to be completely honest, I was exhausted. Like I said, I wasn't as experienced as these hikers, and I really didn't need that breather. I told them I would be following on right behind them, but I only started heading down the mountain about 5 to 10 minutes after they left. I shouldn't have done that, because even in that short amount of time, I managed to get separated from my group. I took a break and set off assuming I would catch them up, but it was so dark I couldn't hear anyone's voice, and I headed down the mountain in the general direction from where I came, and I guess I was making some progress on the descent. That was when I saw something. There was a light shining off in the distance. The first thought that came to my mind was someone in distress. Maybe someone had gone hiking alone on this dark autumn evening and had gotten lost or stuck. I mean, it was easily done. It had just happened to me. So I called out but received no reply. Perhaps they couldn't hear me. I started to move towards that light, but I wanted to find if someone was hurt or not, and I also wondered if it was someone from the group that had come to help me. I really hoped for the latter. As I got closer, I guessed that the light had been strategically set up for me to follow by someone from my group. I breathed a sigh of relief as I began walking to the light. Someone's voice shouted out to me. I guess it was one of the hikers. "Don't go." I stopped in my tracks. "That light's kinda weird, isn't it?" the guy said. I looked closer at the light and thought that something was wrong. It was sort of hovering and swinging from left to right. Then it moved up and down. That doesn't sound like it's all that strange, but I have to tell you that I knew just by the way the light moved that there wasn't a human operating it. It wasn't a handheld torch. It was going up way too high for it to be handheld. I ignored the light and kept going down the mountain in the direction I heard the voice come from. Before long, I got to the bottom and reached the campsite. I took a quick look back towards the mountain and saw the light had already disappeared. I didn't know what it was, but it felt like it was trying to lead me off the path I was on. Had I followed it, I might not have been here today. It was the strangest thing. It all started when summer came, and me and my 3 friends, Lola, Cassie and Jennifer, were all planning to go camping. We were all excited and scared at the same time, because we were going camping alone. Lola asked her dad if he could drop us off, and he agreed to take us. When the next day came, we started heading up. Lola's dad set up the camper that we were using, and there were some spare blankets inside too. Before leaving, Lola's dad got into his truck and turned around. He stopped and rolled down his window and said, "No boys," smiled, and let us know he was joking and drove off. There were 3 rooms in the trailer. One master bedroom and 2 rooms with bunks. Each room had a TV in it, so nobody cared which room they got. Everyone knew that Jennifer didn't like small rooms, so we let her have the big one. I was in a room with Lola, and Catty was in a room by herself. I started unpacking when we heard a loud boom outside. "Lola, did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "The boom." "Yeah?" We both looked at each other startled, and then continued unpacking. But something seemed off. It was the fact that Lola was so chill about it. I was done unpacking, so I walked outside and started a fire. Jennifer walked out and asked if I saw it. When I asked, "Saw what?" she started freaking me out. Panicking, her eyes darting back and forth. And then she calmed. I felt as if something was watching me. So I turned around and I saw an orb in the corner of my eye, reddish black. But by the time I turned to look, it was gone. I was so freaked out, I told Catty she could cook instead. We had a family secret recipe of shepherd's pie and a bunch of vanilla cupcakes. There were about a dozen cupcakes left in the open box, so we just left it on the table and went to bed. I could hear the TV coming from Catty's room, so I punched the wall and told her to be quiet. Right after I said it, everything went quiet, except for a small scream in the distance. It didn't sound human. It gave me chills that ran down my spine. I dozed off, but woke up in the middle of the night from hearing someone in the kitchen. I woke up Lola, and then we walked out into the small hallway that led into the kitchen. I saw Jennifer sitting on the table, staring straight ahead. Then, something touched me. I jumped and realized it was just Catty seeing what was making the weird sound. Jennifer was really creeping me out. She never stared into space this often. But then I noticed something in the corner of my eye. It was a shadowy figure. It was staring at Jennifer and slowly turned to face me and Catty. I froze, and as did Catty. Jennifer then looked at us as if being mind-controlled. Then the figure ran out the window, and Jennifer dropped her head onto the table. We tried to wake her, but ended up falling asleep. This experience still scares me to this day, and it's one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me. Me and the others are still close friends, and we live together now. But we all remember that night, and that thing which we saw. This happened one night when I was out in the mountains. I was set to be staying with some friends that I hadn't seen since school. I was invited by a childhood friend, but besides him everyone else was a stranger. We were set to be staying in a mountain lodge. It was a really nice, pure wooden structure, a log cabin essentially. All of my friends had raved about the lodge before, and I was excited to see if it lived up to the hype. It did. It was a really nice place in the middle of the mountains and pretty rustic. We had plans to go on a hike the following morning. We were supposed to be getting an early night, but we ended up staying up later than expected. I turned the lights off in the lodge in preparation to turn in for the night, and then I heard something strange. This weird, dull noise at the lodge's door. It wasn't very loud. It was barely noticeable. We had left the door open to allow for airflow, but it was a bit weird. To me, it sounded like something sharp hitting a tree. Like those axe-throwing things, but lighter. My friend, who was sort of the leader of our little hiking get-together, was the oldest, and approached the door and pushed it shut and locked it. He didn't say a word, and neither did anyone else in the cabin. No one seemed to be that bothered by the noise, so neither was I, and after everyone went back to their bed, we all went to sleep. When the morning came, I got up to wash my face. It looked like a warm morning, so I opened the door to allow some fresh air into the lodge. I was a bit curious about the noise I heard that night as well. What I saw was pretty freaky. There were loads of these weird fishing hooks jutting out of the door. They had been stabbed into the wood. From each hook was this thick, coarse black thread that trailed off into the distant trees and bush. I couldn't see where they ended. I stood there completely perplexed by what I was seeing, and after a few moments some of the others in the lodge came downstairs and stood by me in the open cabin door. "Ah, something came down from the mountain last night, huh?" "Maybe there wasn't so much prey in the mountain last night," my hiking friends said when they saw the hooks in the door. It made me feel a bit weird. It felt like I was the only one who really didn't know what was going on. They didn't seem that fazed. After those brief comments, the conversation changed. I couldn't stand it. I had to ask about those hooks. A friend of mine told me that a disturbing woman lived out in the woods, and she uses the hooks to hunt small animals. One of them said that, and pointed at one of the gnarled hooks splintered into the wooden door. He didn't point at the hook though, he pointed at the thread. Well, I thought it was thread at first, but on closer inspection I realized it was human hair. Before we left, one of them got his machete out and pried the hooks out of the door, and then cut the thick rope of hair into pieces. We took those iron fishing hooks back with us down the mountain, and threw them in the garbage at the foot of it. It really freaked me out once again, and felt like I was the only one who had found it strange. Nothing else really happened after that. It just seemed as if people were fine with this feral person living out in the mountains, and I decided not to bother hiking the following day. It was just too weird out there. When I was about 14, my dad and I went camping with one of his friends at a local park 5 miles from where we lived. The campground is located in the biggest state park in our area, with miles and miles of trails, many of which are for horseback riding and/or mountain biking, in addition to be able to walk those trails. The day after we initially set up camp, we decided to hike some of the trails after breakfast. After walking about 20 minutes, we came to this group of trees with people both standing on the ground and hanging out from them. The odd part is they were all wearing medieval clothing. They all had some sort of weapon, and they were asking if we were part of some clan, and if that we weren't, we couldn't pass. We tried explaining that we were just campers walking along that particular trail, but I don't think they got it because they asked us the same question again. One of the people started coming towards us, and that's when we started running in the other direction. At the time, we weren't sure of who those people were and what they were doing out in the middle of the woods. But now that I think of it, they were probably a group of people LARPing. But at the time, myself nor my dad or his friend didn't even know about it or that it was a thing. In that moment, we felt intense fear, but now we just laugh about it. I read about this mountain that's famous for a very odd reason. They say that when you climb this mountain, you can hear the laughter of someone. They say that no matter how hard you look for the owner of the laughter, you won't find them. There were lots of rumors about the mountain. Word travels quickly in small villages, and people would constantly try and find the answer to the question of why there was laughter coming from the mountain. Some people speculated that it was a ghost of a small child who passed away somewhere on the mountain that were making the sound of laughter. And the rumors and theories didn't stop there. They spread around the mountain itself. Some villagers said that they were so freaked out by the rumors they wouldn't bring themselves to go anywhere near it. They asked anyone who was brave enough to investigate it and return with an explanation. Word reached a special occult research team at some university, and they were more than willing to investigate. They came with their various machines and were planning on staying night and day until the mystery was finally unraveled. The team researched the mountain thoroughly and arrived back at the village with their findings. They concluded the laughter wasn't created by a spirit, but it wasn't human either. When they found the source, they found that there were many stones in close proximity to the mountain, and that when the wind picked up, it blew through the gaps in the stones, thus producing that eerie laughing sound. The mountain had been that way since ancient times. I imagine that the stones had varied over the years, and if I could remember the name of the mountain, I would have researched it and tried to find more legends. When the university team reported their findings to the villagers, something unexpected happened. The villagers wouldn't believe them. They were certain that the mountain was cursed, and it taunts them with its laughter, claiming the lives it took. Some said the mountain is laughing in warning. The mountain spirits are angry at man's relentless destruction of nature and the environment. When I read that, I got a little shiver for some reason. I guess that was because I used to find the mountains pretty creepy, but I think that people with strong wills and beliefs are a lot creepier. Okay, so we get a call to do a welfare check. Someone called the station house because they hadn't heard from their mum, and if we could pretty please swing by to check on her. Fine. We get to the apartment building, knock on the door, and when there's inevitably no answer, we grab the super to open the door for us. The first sign that things were going terribly wrong was that the chain was still on the door. The second was the god-awful stench coming from the place that told us something was quite dead inside. As before, it's dark in there, and none of the lights worked because they had burnt out in the time the poor lady had been sitting there. We found her on the couch, positive Q sign, hang your tongue out your mouth like you're dead, you get the idea, and smelled the beginning stages of decomposition. So it's the DOA, the cops in the living room, and the super standing in the doorway of this dark apartment, and we obviously have our flashlights trained on the guest of honor. At this point, the dead person raises a hand to her eye in a very zombie-ish fashion and goes, "New." Exactly like that. So, totally zombie, right? Having seen enough, we again run out the house and we're like, we've just seen a ghost. The super, who's not privy to the rise of the living dead, sees two 6'3" cops thundering down the hallway at him, and figures this is his cue to get moving too. Sadly for him, we overtake him and his little stubby legs and leave him to be dined up by the zombie. Survival of the fittest, right? We got down the next flight before we figured that even if it is a zombie, it was an old lady who we could probably kick her ass. We went back to the apartment and called an ambulance. Apparently she had a stroke alone in the apartment and sat there for days. The hand and vocalizations were really what was left of her brain responding to stimulus. We went to the hospital the next day before work, but she was too far gone. My best friend was an officer for about 5 years, and this was his worst/best story. He received a call from dispatch for a welfare check, and when he got to the home, of course, there was no response. He mentioned a pungent smell of death as he stepped foot in the door, knowing damn well this wasn't going to be good. After regrouping himself from the smell, he began to walk down this long hallway where he assumed the smell was coming from. He was halfway down the hall when he noticed blood everywhere in the next room. We are talking floor to ceiling. As he turned the corner into that room, he saw a little ankle biter laying there chewing on something and really didn't think much of it. He then panned the room for a second before he noticed a guy laying in a recliner, holding onto a shotgun pointed at his mouth. This man had literally blown his brains out, had half of a head, and his dog was chewing on a piece of his skull/face. The smell was so awful due to the fact this guy was sitting in his house with no air conditioning in the summer heat for 3 days. Talk about a fun start to your day. In my city, at a travel lodge on the main commercial street, a few people who met on some dating site or Craigslist or something ended up ritualistically killing themselves inside one of the rooms. According to the police report, the two people who found it weren't the actual cops, but rather the next-door occupants. They heard a commotion and looked out their door only to find blood coming through the door like it was The Shining. They walked in to investigate and found the mangled bodies of the two women who found each other, and the barely living body of the guy who found them both. As he told it, they were supposed to let him kill them for the glory of Satan, and something like that, and then he would kill himself. The crime scene was so gruesome and traumatic that several police officers and paramedics and nurses who treated the guy were all later treated for post-traumatic stress, and the incident had led for the movement calling to have PTSD therapy for first responders. I also wish to share that an Air Force major who was in charge of the local cadets corps was found with a massive multi-terabyte storage. Think about that. Multi-terabyte storage of indecent images of children. You know the kind. This is a short story from someone else's perspective. I was in cadets for a few years a while back, in the army, and the commanding officer of our air sister corps was caught with the CP. The guy was a major, and he was in charge of around 100 kids on a weekly basis. I was told he later hung himself in order to escape prosecution. Funny story, I was on a school trip and our bus driver wore a bomber jacket with the Royal Canadian Air Corps crest on it. I sparked up a conversation with him, and it turned out it was Major Pedo's direct successor. One thing led to another, and we got into the conversation about how the major pedophile and how everyone reacted. Believe it or not, but as it turns out, taking over the Air Cadets Corps from someone like that isn't as hard as you would expect, apparently. So, the cop who found it was coincidentally the mother of one of the Air Cadets in the Corps, called it the most disgusting thing she'd seen in all her years of service. No wonder that major decided to call it quits. Safe to say it, but my town of around 200,000 people is quite the little screw-up. Mind you, I haven't even mentioned being the meth and crack harrowing per capita of Ontario. That's a whole nother story. Back when I lived in Maryland a few years ago, I attended a day program facility for outpatient treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder and major depressive disorder. I often liked to walk up to the place early, as well as before the other clients arrived. Me and a friend of mine had full-on access to as many cups of coffee as we could hold down, after the morning janitor Dave let us in. I arrived at my usual time, a little under 2 a.m. I only had 3 more hours to go until Dave pulled in for work and decided to binge some YouTube all on my old Windows phone that I currently had at the time. About an hour or so into listening to Devin the Dude, a pair of tinted blue headlights approached slowly up the driveway into the parking lot. I thought it was Dave at first from afar, until the car soon pulled itself much further into view to reveal the logo of the Howard County Police. Instantly I'm thinking, what the hell? I'm pretty sure I'm not doing anything wrong by just standing here as a client. The officer exits his car along with another, in that of another female who pulls up in another cruiser behind them. Immediately they begin asking me for all my credentials, and I'm confused as hell. I ask them what's going on. They briefly explain to me that a 911 hang-up call was made in the area, and somehow that call in particular was made from my phone. I'm beyond baffled at this point and explained to them that there was no way that was near possible, as my finger never once touched the call icon, let alone left the internet browser. With a bit of confusion of their own I could sense on both their faces and demeanor, they eventually bid me a good rest of the morning and left in their cars and back down the driveway. This still shakes me to this day, of just how someone had gotten into my phone to call 911 while I was still using it, and why. If anyone can help me unravel this mystery of mine, I would certainly appreciate it. I used to see a girl whose dad was a police officer. He told her pretty much the most horrific gangland murder I could ever imagine. They found the body of a local criminal at the bottom of a lake, complete with concrete boots to make sure he sunk. The thing is, whoever did this to him thought it wasn't enough to do that, so they attached an oxygen tank and breathing apparatus so he'd be alive for at least an hour before eventually drowning.